61. The vanished notebook. Flourish and blots felt like it had been hit by an Arctic gust when Lucius Malfoy swept in. He carried himself with the practiced arrogance of a man who knows every eye will turn. His chin was high, his cold gray gaze cutting across the Weasleys with barely concealed contempt for their patched robes. Draco followed, pale and proud, though Roger had managed to rein in some of the boy's nastiness after that last lesson. The young Malfoy still held his chin high enough to be obnoxious, but at least he no longer sneered at the battered textbooks in Ginny and Ron's hands. Lucius, however, was in full force. He crossed to Arthur Weasley with the slow, deliberate poise of a man who intends to wound. In that drawn, disdainful voice, he made a parade of insults, mocking the Weasleys' poverty, sneering at Arthur for his fascination with muggles and for associating with people like Hermione's parents. Each barb landed like a snake's strike, pressing on raw spots. Arthur flushed bright red, his fingers tightened into a fist. After one especially vicious taunt, he could take no more and lunged. Two grown wizards rolled on the shop floor, tumbling and grappling like drunks in a muggle tavern. Clang! Crash! Several shelves were badly damaged as books cascaded down, a riot of color and paper on the shop floor. Roger, alarmed, pushed forward, calling out, "Stop! Stop fighting! Don't!" "Draco, get your father!" someone shouted when they saw the blonde boy. The cry finally shook the crowd. People swarmed in and with effort separated the two disheveled men. Their hair was mussed, robes torn. Roger's eyes, though, were fixed on Lucius's hands. He had been sure the diary would be there, slipped into Ginny's old bag in the confusion. But Lucius's palms were empty. The diary was not in his grasp. Lucius only stared at Arthur with that bright, cold malice, as if plotting some more subtle revenge, then hauled Draco out of the shop without a backward glance. Roger froze. The diary, Tom Riddle's diary, the Horcrux, was missing. He had expected to plant it here. Where had it gone? Had Lucius dropped it somewhere among the toppled books? Had it never been there at all? The realization that events weren't lining up with what he'd planned hit him colder than the Malfoys' disdain. Something had changed the original sequence of the story. Something important and unfamiliar was happening. Everyone else drifted away, their appetites for shopping gone. Roger, however, slipped into a small alchemy shop nearby. His wand had been taken from him before. He would not be helpless again. If he couldn't rely entirely on a wand, he could either train to cast without one, an immense task, or find a better concealed spell-casting device. Lately, he'd been thinking along the second path. He'd spent the summer poring over Nicholas Flamel's alchemical notes and tinkering with the Ford Anglia. Flamel's theories stuck with him. Flamel believed that magic and life force could be converted into one another, hence the elixir of life. But more relevant to Roger was Flamel's work with ancient runes to build precise magical circuits that could store raw magical energy in a material form. Normally, magic striking matter is like a spark onto gunpowder. It detonates into an effect, which is why wizards rely on wands. Flamel's creations could instead hold magic power in a limited, stable way and release it when commanded. It wasn't that he'd been trying to trap particular spells, he'd been storing power itself. If Roger could adapt that idea, he could fashion a metal device that behaved like a wand, storing power through runes and releasing it on command, or at least an alchemical item that served the same function and couldn't easily be taken away. Decision made, Roger emptied the Gringotts withdrawal into the shop without hesitation. He bought whatever he needed, paying in a blur of galleons. Outside, Harry was pestering Ron about Sirius, full of questions about who he was and why he had come. Fred and George, who had followed Roger into the shop, were wide-eyed among the alchemical instruments. They fondled curious things and peered at strange vials. They didn't have the cash to buy anything substantial, so when they saw Roger casually toss out stacks of gold, their jaws dropped. 4 staring eyes proclaimed a single thought: Merlin's beard, enough galleons to buy a small shop. A short walk down Diagon Alley, beside the Daily Prophet's building and in front of an empty storefront, Lucius Malfoy halted with Draco. He stood with hands behind his back, surveying the space with that cool, assessing gaze. "Father," Draco said after a moment, more puzzled than angry, "there was no need to start a fight with Mr. Weasley, was there?" To his surprise, Lucius did not scold him. He inclined his head slowly. You're right, Draco. So why? Lucius cut him off with a graceful lift of his hand. The ministry is shifting, he said, lowering his voice to that steady, conspiratorial tone. The rift between Minister Fudge and Dumbledore is growing. If one wishes to profit from the situation, one must make one's alliances clear. But the Malfoys have no desire to provoke Dumbledore directly. He fixed Draco with a sharp look. A small public slight against his most loyal supporter, Arthur Weasley, signifies our stance without inviting Dumbledore's ire. He did not say everything. The performance had an audience beyond their little corner, ministry men, and perhaps darker eyes. Positions needed to be declared, options reserved. These subtleties were beyond Draco's full comprehension. So, you want us to distance ourselves from Dumbledore? He asked, tentative. You may see it that way, Lucius replied, glancing toward the distant silhouette of Hogwarts. At school, however, carry on as usual. Then, changing his tone to something almost intimate, he leaned closer. There is a secret of Hogwarts, I can tell you, something that will make dealing with those mudbloods much easier. Once, Draco's bloodline pride would have shivered with excited anticipation. Now the conviction in him felt looser. Still, curiosity made him ask, what secret? Lucius's voice dropped to a near hiss. Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets. He outlined the legend, its hidden location, and the method to open it. Draco's throat went dry. You want me to open it? Yes. A cold light flashed in Lucius's eyes. The little creature Salazar Slytherin left inside, let it clear out the filthy mudbloods from the school. Consider it a gift to Minister Fudge. 62. Vision Charms and Dementors, King's Cross Station, Platform 9 3/4. Time had flown, and the platform was far more crowded this year than in previous ones. The ministry had clearly increased security. Aurors moved through the crowd with tense, watchful faces, their eyes flicking over every trunk and witch's hat. Rumors from the Muggle government had put everyone on edge. A whole Muggle village had experienced a large-scale disappearance. Given how Sirius Black had once demolished an entire street with a single blasting curse, 12 Muggles dead and Peter Pettigrew supposedly killed, ministry officials were almost certain he was involved this time too. The story had been tightly held, shared only at director and supervisor levels to avoid panic. Arthur Weasley was among those who knew. He stood on the platform by the barrier, unusually nervous, palms damp with sweat. Fortunately, Minister Fudge didn't want anything to befall Harry and ruin the fragile veneer of peace he'd been clinging to. Aurors had been quietly stationed among the crowds to protect the students. It wasn't until the last of the younger students had slipped through the brick wall that Arthur allowed himself a small sigh of relief. A patch of sweat soaked through the back of his shirt. Roger had followed Percy and the Weasley twins onto the train. He caught sight of Arthur leaning over Harry, speaking in a low, serious voice. Roger guessed it was the usual parental injunction to stay at Hogwarts and be careful. Harry was only in his second year and wasn't even allowed into Hogsmeade. There wasn't much chance of him wandering off. Once aboard, Roger sat with Fred and George in a carriage that hummed with excitement. After their recent success tinkering with the flying car, the three had been talking non-stop about alchemy and magical engineering. Fred and George already had a plan: invent clever new gadgets, sell them, save up, and open their own shop. They scoffed at the idea of settling into a proper job at the Ministry or Gringotts. Their talent wasn't for arcane charms or complex potions, so much as an uncanny knack for turning magic into fun, practical contraptions. In less than a summer, they'd reverse-engineered the alchemical flying bird. Roger had brought and made a budget design. By swapping rare components for common, inexpensive substitutes, they claimed they could force the cost down to under 7 galleons. Still expensive, but no longer a luxury, something a lot of families might consider. Their imaginations had gone further. Why stop at letter-carrying birds? Scale the idea up into a freight bird that could carry packages. Parents could send parcels to school and have them apparat the rest of the way, far faster than an owl struggling for days. If large birds could be priced right and shrunk for storage, they could overhaul wizarding logistics and put owl postmen out of business. The twins also dreamed of shield-branded gloves, hats and cloaks becoming standard Auror issue. Of course, building large freight birds required expensive materials and advanced apparition work, adult-level magic the twins couldn't manage alone. Roger didn't see that as a problem. Swaying with the carriage, he offered them a deal. "I'll put up the money, you provide the tech. We split the profits 50-50. It was the kind of offer that made the twins nearly levitate out of their seats. They stared at each other, then at Roger, grins spreading. Excitement crackled between them. Then clatter, clatter. The train slowed. Fred reached his head to the window. The landscape outside was still the same bleak highlands. "What's going on? We haven't reached a station." "Then why stop?" George muttered. The wheel's roar dwindled until there was only the wind and the drum of rain against the glass. Roger was nearest the door. He stood, slid it open, and peered into the corridor. Every compartment was in the same state, heads turned, curious and worried. With a metallic groan, the train came to a complete stop. A series of farther-off clanks echoed along the line. Then, as if the world had been punched out, all the lights in the carriage went poof, and the train was swallowed by ink-black darkness. George pressed his palm to the cold glass, trying to wipe away the condensation. There's something moving out there. They're boarding the train. In that absolute dark, their eyes seemed to shine unnaturally. The carriage filled with frightened noises, sobbing, startled cries, the thump of people bumping into one another. Roger's hand was on his wand in an instant. Lumos. A narrow beam of light stabbed through the dark, illuminating their compartment. For a moment it felt like the first honest light that had shone on the whole train. But the brightness seemed to be a signal. The compartment door was yanked open, and a figure stood in the frame. A tall shape in ragged black robes, its hood hanging low, and a head that nearly brushed the ceiling. Even though it faced them, there was nothing to see where a face should be. "A Dementor," the three of them said together, stomachs dropping. Roger knew what worked against Dementors, the Patronus charm. The problem was none of them, neither he nor Fred nor George knew how to cast one. The thing at the door inhaled, a wet, rattling, sucking sound, as if it were tasting the atmosphere. A cold that belonged to graveyards rolled into the compartment. The air thinned, breath became difficult. The cold sank through Roger's skin into his bones, making his chest feel like ice. Thought grew difficult. Every memory was dulled. The thing wasn't satisfied. It drifted forward, taking deeper, greedier breaths. Fred and George's eyes rolled back. The bright irises vanished, leaving only the terrified whites. They slumped to the seat, like puppets whose strings had been cut. Roger felt himself reeling, ears full of desperate wails and pleas, body heavy as lead. He could not allow himself to go under. He bit the tip of his tongue until pain cut through the numbness and forced a sliver of clarity. He gripped his wand with everything he had left and cleared his mind, leaving only one raw purpose: expel, destroy. He pointed at the advancing shadow and threw every ounce of will and invention he could muster into a wordless cry. The self-made spell he had been terrified, fascinated, and secretly practicing, the Avada soul-severing curse. A jagged green bolt leapt from his wand, striking the Dementor's misty form. When the green light struck, it was like a chain being snapped. With a sharp snap, the carriage lights flared back to life, banishing the crushing black. The Dementor was gone from the doorway. Only a scrap of its rotten hood lay on the floor. Roger panted, heart hammering, cold sweat soaking his shirt. He had no idea what the true effect of that spell was, or what the moral cost might be, but whatever he had unleashed had driven the creature off. In the aftermath, his mind ran wild with possibilities. Capture one of those beings, study a creature made of raw emotion and soul energy. But there would be time later for theorizing. Fred and George groaned and stirred, blinking as consciousness returned. The Hogwarts Express gave a long whistle, and the wheels slowly began to turn again, accelerating as if the darkness and cold had been nothing more than a bad dream. 63. Special Investigator. For the rest of the trip, the train rattled on, but the laughter and chatter that had filled the compartment before were gone. Only the steady roll of the wheels remained, and a quiet, somewhat stifling atmosphere settled over the carriage. Roger pulled Gilderoy Lockhart's book back out and began to read. Even if Lockhart was an obvious fraud and plagiarist, Roger had to admit the adventures in the book, stolen though they might be, contained a surprising number of true stories and a smattering of genuine, obscure spells. He found himself getting absorbed. One entry, A Year with the Tibetan Yeti, described a spirit vision spell, supposedly used by wizards on high plateaus during whiteouts when they could not open their eyes. It let them perceive the outside world directly with their soul, seeing clearly even with their eyes shut. As the train rocked, Roger's curiosity won out. He closed his eyes and tried the method described. To his amazement, it worked. The image in his mind was blurred, as if seen through frosted glass, but the outlines of benches, trunks, and the shadows of trees sweeping past the window formed dim impressions. He thought about the spell's principle, something like the way ghosts see, a wizard spreading magic like invisible tendrils to gather external information and sending it straight into consciousness, bypassing ordinary sight. At last, the Hogwarts Express, belching clouds of white steam, slid into Hogsmeade Station. When the doors opened, the platform erupted. Younger students piled out in a tide of shouts, clattering trunks, and hoots from owls. At the end of the platform, near Hagrid's towering figure, Professor McGonagall stood more severe than usual. Her lips were pressed thin, her face a mask of tension. The older students were directed in another direction by McGonagall. The rest stepped out to find nearly 100 rickety carriages lined up by the roadside, each drawn by thestrals. Roger's eyes lit up. Thestrals were rare, dark creatures the wizarding world treated as an ill omen. He crept close to one carriage and quietly switched his biocomputer to observation mode. The creature was skeletal, its dark leathery hide stretched over a dragon-like skull with pale, pupilless eyes. Huge bat wings folded against its flanks, and a mouthful of sharp teeth suggested a chill threat. Magical patterns flowed faintly around the beasts. The lines formed ancient runes that read like death. Roger remembered something Voldemort had said, runes tied to death or the dreams of ancient wizards, and shivered. He squeezed into a carriage with Neville, Fred, and George. Neville clutched his toad Trevor so hard his knuckles went white, his face pale as he muttered, "They look so scary." Roger blinked. "You can see them?" he asked. Neville's voice dropped into a quiet, almost sorrowful murmur. "When my grandfather died, I was there with him. He was very good to me." He looked up at Roger timidly. "Can you see them too? Did you have someone?" Neville's words pricked Roger like a needle. He hadn't experienced death in his past or present life, so why could he see the thestrals? Then he remembered the Dementor on the train, the one he'd thought he'd dealt with. If that had really been killed, it certainly counted as witnessing death. That must be why he could see the thestrals. Maybe Dementors were more biological than anyone admitted. Oddly, after the thing had been defeated, there'd only been a scrap of cloth left behind. His biocomputer had scanned it and found nothing unusual, just ordinary fabric. The Dementors still held many secrets. The carriage creaked forward and climbed the road toward the castle gates. Two tall, wrought-iron gates, topped by stone statues of winged boars, marked the entrance. For a moment, the carriage's atmosphere froze. Two cloaked, hooded figures stood at the gate. Dementors, an invisible cold and a wave of despair spread through the air. Conversation stopped. The closer they came, the heavier the chill. Many students went pale and closed their eyes tightly as the carriage passed through. Only when the slope rose and the carriages pulled away did they risk a furtive glance back to see whether the grim sentries remained. Roger spotted Harry and Hermione in the carriage ahead and waved. The carriages stopped at the castle's grand steps, and the students filed into the brightly lit Great Hall. The enchanted ceiling twinkled with stars as always, but two new faces sat at the staff table this year. The most striking was Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, swathed in a golden suit so shiny it flashed like a walking galleon. Since publicly attacking the ministry, he dominated the front pages and shown no shortage of fans, some of whom worked at the ministry, so the ministry had, for the moment, chosen not to punish him. With the country reeling from the mysterious disappearance of an entire Muggle village, there had been little appetite for further scandal. Beside him sat a short, stout woman in a garish pink suit. Her neck was almost non-existent, and she sat ramrod straight, trying in vain to compete with Lockhart's glare. Her expression toward him was icy. She did not even glance in his direction. Dumbledore, white hair and beard gleaming under the candlelight, stood to speak. He was in good spirits, but his face bore a visible weight. "Welcome," his voice rang out. "Welcome back to Hogwarts. Before the new school year begins, I have a few things to announce." He stopped as a high-pitched, thin voice pierced the hall, deliberately clipped and girlish. Dolores Umbridge had risen. Her voice was shrill enough to make Roger's teeth ache, like a toad trying to croak like a frog. "Hem! Hem! Students, please allow me to take up a little of your time." Dumbledore sat down without showing surprise. At the staff table, faces varied. McGonagall's was ashen. Lockhart smiled his usual charming smile, oblivious. Umbridge looked around the silent hall, savoring the attention. "I am Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister of Magic," she declared, each word a syrup of false sweetness. "The ministry firmly believes that integrity is the cornerstone of education and the fundamental principle of every wizard's academic path." Her voice climbed with sanctimonious fervor. "However, we have received disconcerting reports of serious academic fraud within Hogwarts. Therefore, by order of Minister Cornelius Fudge, I have been appointed Special Investigator. From this moment on, I will have full authority to investigate this matter thoroughly. We must root out the pests and restore academic purity." The Great Hall erupted. Strangely, almost everyone's gaze, pulled as if by invisible strings, shifted at once toward the Hufflepuff table. A smug, practiced smile spread across Umbridge's powdered face. Her eyes locked, with clinical precision, on the 12-year-old Roger Lewis. Roger felt a cold flicker of confusion. The ministry's response seemed overblown. An undersecretary sent to investigate? He hadn't expected any connection to himself. He had passed the transfiguration on his own. He would tell the truth. Besides, he needed the prize money. Fred and George had already compiled a list of alchemy supplies for the first phase of their work, totaling 500 galleons, and several experiments he wanted to run were waiting for funding. The money from selling the unicorn wouldn't last. Umbridge narrowed her small, cruel eyes at him. She measured the ordinary, non-threatening boy before her, and a barely perceptible sneer tightened her painted lips. "It seems turning this case into an ironclad conviction won't be difficult at all," she murmured, as if to herself, already pleased with the hunt. 64. Ministry of Magic Investigation. On the first floor of Hogwarts Castle, in a room hastily set aside for inquiries, the place felt stripped bare. A single table stood in the center with a chair on either side. In a corner, a stenographer hunched over a pad, recording every word. Wayne Hopkins sat awkwardly, fingers worrying at the hem of his robes. Opposite him, perched like a pale pink vulture, was Mrs. Dolores Umbridge. "Relax, Mr. Hopkins," she purred in her sickly sweet voice, a fixed smile pasted on her face. "We only wish to gain a clear understanding of the situation regarding your roommate, Roger Lewis." A large pink bow was pinned to her mouse-brown curls, and her garish pink cardigan clung to her like armor. From the second day of term, the senior undersecretary had swept through the castle with relentless efficiency. She and her team had gone through professors' files, seized first-year assignments, especially Roger's, and hauled them away as if they were contraband. When she saw how many of the assignments seemed stamped from the same mold, her eyes gleamed. She ordered the papers locked in a magically protected cabinet, treating them like some rare treasure. The next step, of course, was the interviews. Roger's roommate would be first. Umbridge flipped through the file on Wayne without looking up. "Tell me, how did you meet Mr. Lewis?" Wayne recited their first meeting on the train. "From what you're saying," Umbridge said, raising her eyelids in faux surprise, "Mr. Lewis seemed quite ordinary when he entered Hogwarts?" No, Wayne rushed to defend him. "Roger's brilliant. He already knew Transfiguration when he arrived. On the Hogwarts Express, he hesitated, then blurted, he turned Draco Malfoy's gang into rats." Umbridge acted as though the latter detail had not reached her ears and continued, "So when did you first notice Mr. Lewis researching this so-called polymorphic transformation?" Wayne paused, trying to summon a memory. Sweat beaded at his temple. I don't think I saw him do that very often." "As far as I know," Umbridge's voice sharpened, her smile hardening, "last school year you were inseparable, reading together in the library, sharing a dormitory, practicing spells for exams. In all that time, you never once observed him researching new magic." She leaned forward, her gaze wanting to bore through him. Wayne's mind blanked. Over the summer, the ministry-controlled papers had drenched Roger in suspicion. An 11-year-old awarded the Order of Merlin. First class? Preposterous. The headlines had scoffed. An ordinary child could not have created his own spell. The ministry's nudging had planted doubt everywhere. Even Wayne's own father, after reading the articles, had frowned and muttered that it sounded impossible. Wayne believed Roger's gifts, but under Umbridge's fierce interrogation, he found himself uncertain. He had never seen Roger waving a wand and testing spells with the noisy flair of other wizards. Most of the time, Roger had his nose buried in heavy books. Much of his research, Wayne now realized with growing confusion, happened inside his head, aided by that mysterious biocomputer he never understood. To someone like Wayne, it did not look like research at all. Then tell me the specifics, Umbridge demanded, cold as an ice cellar. When? Where? Which new spell? Wayne sat mute, mouth open, the details refusing to organize themselves. He could not explain how Roger's laboratory was often reading and thought, not sparks and dramatic trial and error. Seeing him falter, Umbridge's triumph finally broke across her face. So there was nothing. Professor, I didn't mean that, Wayne began, but Umbridge cut him off. An entire school year. You lived with Mr. Lewis day and night, and you can't say when or where he researched any new spells? Or perhaps, she drawled with a poisonous insinuation, he never researched them at all? I didn't see it, but... Very good, she snapped, wheeling to the stenographer. Her voice was sharp and insistent. Record this. Mr. Hopkins has personally confirmed he never saw Mr. Lewis researching any new magic. She turned back, her smile gone, replaced by a threat as plain as a brand. Mr. Hopkins, I must remind you that you are required to state the facts truthfully. Any concealment or deceit will not serve you, or your father, Mr. Wilbur Hopkins. Her tone scraped at his nerves. Next question. How are Mr. Lewis's relations with the Hogwarts professors? Who is he particularly close to? Thrown by the confrontation, Wayne's defenses collapsed. He poured out everything he could think of, that most of the professors liked Roger, that Roger had been summoned to the headmaster's office in both terms, and even that summer at Nicholas LeMay Manor, though the latter detail barely interested Umbridge. As a high-ranking ministry official, she already had internal reports. She knew far more than a green first year. What she did not know, at least not from her file, was that the report she'd been given, sanctioned by Fudge and concocted by the Auror office, downplayed Roger's part. The ministry version had inflated its own role and framed Scrimgeour and his Aurors as the heroes, relegating a first year's duplication charm and other Hogwarts contributions to footnotes. Umbridge took what she had and read into it the kind of corruption she was eager to expose. When there was nothing more she could squeeze from Wayne, she called the interview to an end. Wayne felt as if he had been released from a suffocating chamber and practically fled the room. The stenographer handed Umbridge the record with a reverent motion. She skimmed it, unable to hide a small, satisfied curl of her mouth. The waters around Hogwarts were muddier than she had imagined. There was academic rot here, perhaps an elaborate deception by the so-called greatest white wizard. Dolores Umbridge's chest swelled with righteous purpose. She would be the one to strip away Dumbledore's hypocritical mask and expose the truth. 65. Secret Room. Roger urgently needed a place, safe, hidden, and big enough to run his alchemy experiments. Hogwarts hid countless secret spaces. Legend had it the four founders left things behind. The most infamous was Salazar Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets, a long, dark vault locked away so completely that in 1,000 years the number of people who had found it could be counted on one hand. Roger figured it must lie far beneath the castle's deepest foundations, with security to match. If he set off a few explosions down there, not a sound would reach the surface. And since Lord Voldemort's diary Horcrux was currently missing, nobody this year should even know the chamber's location. It was an ideal laboratory, except for one problem: the basilisk. The serpent's nest lay behind the statue of Slytherin, held in a forced sleep by powerful magic that only Parseltongue could undo. If he didn't do anything suicidal to awaken it, Roger thought he could move about safely. Better yet, he could study the creature and maybe learn a new transformation form from it. He found a voice-changing charm in the restricted section that would mimic Parseltongue, used it to open the entrance, and at midnight slipped into the chamber with Fred and George. "This is the legendary Chamber of Secrets?" Fred ran his fingers over the coiling snake carvings on a cold stone pillar, voice full of wonder. "Merlin's beard. Roger, how on earth did you find this? It's hidden so deep." "Legend says there's a monster here," George muttered, less at ease as he scanned the vaulted hall nervously. "Are we really setting up a lab here? Feels a bit intense." "Come on, George. It's just a legend." Fred waved a hand, looking over the vast chamber that opened before them. "Even if there was a monster, after 1,000 years its bones would be dust by now." Roger shook his head, and without another word, produced 2 pairs of specially made alchemy sunglasses from his robes and shoved them into the twins' hands. "Put these on." Although Parseltongue was needed to wake the basilisk, Roger had taken precautions against its lethal, petrifying gaze. The sunglasses were designed to withstand that magic. The twins examined the slim, stylish frames and the faintly glowing lenses with baffled delight. "What are these for?" George asked. "To save your lives," Roger said. "Just in case the legend's true." Fred was already indifferent to danger. He loved a good design. An idea struck him. "Hey, Roger, what if you made a pair that lets you see what the other person sees?" "That's brilliant," George said, popping his pair on. "If I could see what you see, I'd freak out and laugh at the same time." Roger smiled. It was a fun thought. If he gave one to Voldemort, everyone could share the Harry Potter scar visions. No, maybe he should give them to Dumbledore and Grindelwald so they could watch each other. The idea amused him more than it should. "Ha! This is awesome. I want to start building them," Fred began, before a sound cut him off. Clear footsteps came from the chamber's entrance, 3 sharp taps on stone. The twins froze. Roger's stomach dropped. The chamber hadn't been opened in 1,000 years. The last person to open it had been the young Tom Riddle. In theory, besides the 3 of them, only Voldemort and a half-ghost knew where the entrance was. Moaning Myrtle probably knew about the bathroom, but that diary Horcrux was missing now. Who could be opening the chamber now? Lord Voldemort himself? Or some unlucky soul bewitched by the diary? Either way, the possibility of running into the Dark Lord, whether in his old terrifying form or his cunning young one, made Roger tense. He tightened his grip on his wand with his right hand, while his left slipped into his robe for a cold bottle of magic-sensing potion. He readied himself for a fight. The shadow at the entrance resolved into a person, and Roger felt his jaw nearly drop. Draco Malfoy stepped into the doorway. Meanwhile, on the second-floor girls' bathroom, Dolores Umbridge swept in on the arm of her efficient assistant, Osbert Thomas, her pink kitten heels clicking on the tiles. She carried a thrill of undisguised excitement as she stepped through the doorway. "Are you certain Roger Lewis went in here?" Umbridge asked, her voice low and eager. She could already taste the political advantage of bringing some scandal to Dumbledore's door. "Absolutely certain, Madam Minister." Osbert bowed with the proper deference, his expression a masterpiece of practiced flattery. "I saw him in the library, heading this way. When I followed him into the bathroom, he vanished. There must be a secret entrance hidden here." Umbridge's smile widened. A hidden base in the Chamber of Secrets. This was the kind of thing she could use. She was imagining the headlines. A shrill, tearful voice cut through the bathroom's tiled hush. "Who are you?" A translucent girl in an old Hogwarts robe floated up out of a toilet bowl, dripping and wailing, moaning Myrtle. Umbridge straightened, chest out. "I am Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister of Magic," she announced, trying to sound officious and imposing. "I am investigating suspicious individuals. Who did you just see? Where did they go?" "I don't know," Myrtle screamed, sobs echoing off the tiles. "I was just minding my business, and then people popped out. They went into that place. They were speaking that horrible hissing voice. Like snakes. Hiss, hiss. It was awful. Horrible." She clutched her face as if replaying a terrible night and dove back into her toilet, leaving only muffled sobs. Osbert and Umbridge exchanged a look. "Madam Minister," Osbert said in a careful whisper, "perhaps we should wait until they leave and then sneak in. We'll find conclusive proof of Dumbledore's wrongdoing." The title pleased Umbridge. He was an efficient recruit, useful, flattering, and crucially, a parcel mouth. She almost felt as if fate were smiling on her. But she shook her head. Dumbledore showed up at the start of term and then vanished. He must be hiding something big. We won't rush in now. That will only alert them. She smiled a tight, dangerous smile. Invite Roger Lewis for a little chat instead. If he confesses, so much the better. If he refuses, we'll return and take whatever treasures the chamber contains. Hogwarts Castle, first floor, the inquiry room. Name? Umbridge asked in her signature sickly sweet falsetto, a fixed, saccharine smile on her face. Roger Lewis, he replied. Roger hated these bureaucratic interrogations, but he just wanted to get it over with so his bonus would come through. Alchemical supplies were expensive. His few thousand galleons barely covered a couple of experiments. The files show you're an orphan, Umbridge said, flipping open the folder, her quill tip hovering over the paper. Yet it was Headmaster Dumbledore who personally decided to admit you. She emphasized the word personally with relish. Roger hesitated. Yes. He remembered the letter had indeed been signed by Dumbledore. What was the problem with that? It had nothing to do with the polymorphic transformation he had been researching. Umbridge's voice oozed honeyed delight. It seems Headmaster Dumbledore is truly very attentive to you. So tell me about the origin of this polymorphic transformation. Finally, they got to the point. Roger explained the genesis of the spell, careful to omit the biocomputer angle, saying it was based on research notes from a previous Dark Wizard mentor and on some initial guidance from Dumbledore. Umbridge nodded, her quill scratching across the parchment. So, when the admission letter was delivered, Headmaster Dumbledore was already guiding your transfiguration research. Yes, and at that time, did he do anything else? Umbridge leaned forward, eyes bright, as if she'd smelled a clue. Professor Dumbledore took some things from me, Roger answered honestly. Dumbledore had explained concepts, but had taken several of his dark arts books. No secret manuals, but he had taken those volumes. It was true, and it demonstrated that Roger's research had been carried out independently. Things? Umbridge's face lit up like a vulture scenting blood. She didn't press for further details. She went straight to the Hogwarts ledgers and accounts on the table. In short order, she found the entries that matched the time Roger described. Her lips twitched, her eyes greedily scanned the list. 1 complete unicorn carcass, 7 magic books, including Imperio, Crucio, Killing Curse, the Soul's Scalpel. A unicorn carcass fetched at least 20,000 galleons on the market, yet in the Hogwarts ledger, it was recorded as only 5,000. With that single item, Umbridge realized Dumbledore could pocket 15,000 galleons while the books still balanced. It was a clever trick. Oh, yes, I see, she said, fighting to keep her composure, though her voice trembled with barely contained excitement. Headmaster Dumbledore also received quite a few things from you? She felt as if she'd struck gold. Dumbledore soliciting bribes. The chief warlock of the Wizengamot, taking massive offerings from a newly admitted orphan? Dark arts books among them? To Umbridge, this proved Dumbledore secretly craved dark arts research. Her heart beat faster. She believed she had finally torn off that hypocrite's mask. Sympathy for the supposed extorted student swelled inside her. To be exploited by someone so powerful and be reduced to silent resentment was a dark injustice. She exchanged a satisfied look with Osbert beside her, feeling new admiration for Minister Fudge's supposed foresight. All the outside criticism of Fudge suddenly seemed like calumny. Clearly, he had seen through Dumbledore long ago. Dumbledore's refusal to become minister and his insistence on remaining at Hogwarts made sense now. If the school was his private vault and a base for decades of wrongdoing, who could stand in his way? If the ledgers could be manipulated like this, what else had been hidden? Even the rumors about him aiming to become a new Dark Lord seemed less far-fetched to Umbridge. Compared to Dumbledore, Voldemort was almost moral. Voldemort drank plain water, she thought, while Dumbledore wouldn't even leave an orphan alone without sucking the marrow out of him. Roger's minor academic impropriety shrank in Umbridge's estimation. She steered the questioning back to the Order of Merlin application. So, regarding the application for the Order of Merlin, what did Dumbledore say to you in the end? Roger noticed the senior undersecretary's expression had taken on a peculiar intensity, but he had told the truth and felt there was nothing more to hide. "At first, I didn't want the trouble," he said. "But Professor Dumbledore said there would be a large bonus, so I agreed." Umbridge nodded as if confirming a pattern. Inside, she was ecstatic. "That fits! Roger cooperated with Dumbledore. There's the relationship, and there's the massive bonus." A perfect transaction. They completed the inquiry record quickly. After Roger signed, Umbridge even escorted him to the door in an excess of feigned kindness. "My dear child, please be assured," she purred, "the Ministry of Magic will investigate this matter thoroughly and ensure you get justice." Roger was taken aback. In the original stories, Umbridge had been monstrous, half-blood yet championing pure-blood prejudice, leading the Muggle-born Registration Commission, sending innocents to Azkaban, introducing anti-werewolf legislation that cost Lupin his job, even sending Dementors after Harry. Her only relative virtue was that she had not defected to Voldemort. Wayne had been terrified when he was summoned before, but now Roger realized Wayne simply hadn't seen this side of her, the investigator handling things with an appearance of fairness. Roger even began to calculate his bonus arriving soon. In the days that followed, Umbridge whipped up an investigation storm at Hogwarts. She didn't stop with Roger. She invited many students and even Professor McGonagall for talks. The results were disastrous. Interviews ended in hostile arguments or broke down on bad terms. Harry was asked if he had seen Roger perform transfiguration. He truthfully described the formidable transformation Roger had been able to execute. Umbridge brushed it aside. "Mr. Potter, you can only prove he can use this magic, not that he researched it," she said. Harry left bewildered and shaky, signing his name without really understanding what he'd done. Hermione pointed out that Roger had transfiguration materials given by Dumbledore and that she had seen him transform Devil's Snare. Umbridge seized on this. "See, Dumbledore gave him the materials, then he learned transfiguration, and then packaged it as polymorphic transformation." Hermione's logic, clear to her, was dismissed as nonsense by Umbridge, and the two had a furious argument. Hermione left in a storm, slamming the door behind her. Ron mentioned that over the summer, Roger had been experimenting with something he called an Avada chain curse at home, and had even tinkered with an enchanted flying car. Umbridge took this as proof, along with Wayne's previous testimony, that Roger had not been working on any new magic in his first year, and that his summer projects had nothing to do with polymorphic transformation. But the most explosive confrontation came with Professor McGonagall. It was catastrophic, an argument so fierce it nearly blew the roof off the inquiry room and echoed through the castle. Hogwarts was turned upside down by the investigation team. Voices and accusations ricocheted through corridors, and suspicions piled up on both sides. And then, amid the chaos, Dumbledore finally returned to his loyal school. 67. The Theory of 4-in-1 Longevity. Wiltshire, England. Malfoy Manor, once famed for its immaculate gardens, gurgling fountains, and the proud white peacocks that strutted the grounds, now lay under an oppressive hush. Patches of the garden had withered as if some invisible blight had leached the life from them. Even the usually imperious peacocks huddled in their nests, feathers damp and trembling. The wrought iron gates, once intricate and inviting, now seemed to usher visitors into a fog of dread. Beneath the main house, in the massive cavernous basement, the rooms were overflowing. Thousands of terrified muggles had been driven down here. The air was thick with panic and the metallic tang of fear. At the center of the chamber sat a cold stone platform, carved with obscure ancient runes, radiating an unsettling, malevolent aura. "Lucius." Lord Voldemort's voice cut through the chill like a snake's tongue scraping stone, low, oily, and abrupt. "How are the preparations for the alchemical workshop coming along?" Lucius Malfoy bowed, trembling slightly, an undercurrent of barely contained excitement in his voice. "Master, the shop and the staff are ready. It's just the blueprints you provided for the alchemical device. Our craftsmen have not fully mastered all the subtleties. It will take a little more time before production can begin." He had reason to be eager. Voldemort had indeed bestowed something extraordinary. The Quick-Write charm, granted this time, held enormous potential, a device allowing messages to be transmitted simply by speaking a name and writing text, communication unbound by distance. But more than that, it could receive and display information. If the Daily Prophet could be persuaded to cooperate, every witch and wizard equipped with one would instantly become a subscriber. Better yet, they could bypass the Prophet and create a new paper delivered through the quick right charm, controlling the mouthpiece of public opinion across the wizarding world. This was an alchemical creation that could reshape the entire magical landscape, and Malfoy House would hold the reins. For Lucius, the rewards of following Voldemort had suddenly become tangible: economic benefit and a special status for his house. "Very good," Voldemort said, voice betraying no warmth but a cold urgency like icy breath. "But faster. This concerns the cornerstone of our cause." He paused, his hiss turned darker. "And the sacrifices?" Lucius bowed deeper, his voice tight. "Master, the Muggle Prime Minister has alerted the Ministry. Aurors and Dementors patrol everywhere. We have only collected just over 3,000 Muggles this month," he reported, the numbers given with visible unease. "Fewer than expected." Voldemort's pale face remained impassive. Displeasure barely touched his features. Sacrifices could be found. What vexed him were his Horcruxes. He had split his soul into fragments and created Horcruxes: Tom Riddle's diary, Marvolo Gaunt's ring, Ravenclaw's diadem, Hufflepuff's cup, Slytherin's locket, and the accidental one, Harry Potter. Of course, he did not know the full truth about Harry. Recently, he had personally reclaimed 3 of the Horcruxes: the ring from the Gaunt shack, the cup from Bellatrix's vault in Gringotts, and the diary recovered via Lucius. They lay cold and still on the stone platform behind him. 2 remained missing. Slytherin's locket, once hidden in his chosen cave, had vanished. Ravenclaw's diadem still rested quietly in the room of requirement at Hogwarts. Voldemort left the gloomy basement and returned to the manor's cold, empty drawing room. As he took a seat, his voice hissed like a snake through dry leaves. "Slytherin's locket. Any news?" Lucius had been efficient. Through Creature, the Black family's house elf, he had discovered the locket's current location: 12 Grimmauld Place, the ancestral home of the House of Black. Retrieving it would be straightforward. Voldemort gave a slight nod of approval at Lucius's competence, but his face darkened until it looked as if ink might drip from it. Only Ravenclaw's diadem remains. A trip to Hogwarts will be unavoidable. Hogwarts, Dumbledore's domain. Infiltrating it unnoticed would be no small feat. Voldemort's thoughts sharpened around the name of the troublesome headmaster. His temple throbbed with the memory of past confrontations. He had not yet fully regained his strength and could not yet face Dumbledore head-on. The journey promised danger. But it had to be done. He needed to reclaim all his Horcruxes, reunite his scattered soul fragments, and complete the shattered origin of his will. Only then could he achieve true resurrection. More than that, he now believed he had found a superior path to immortality. In his youth, Voldemort had embraced the doctrine that power arose from the will purified to its extreme, an idea he associated with Dumbledore's teachings. Horcruxes had been his chosen method, not only for immortality, but as a crucible to temper and intensify his will. The power he amassed after creating multiple Horcruxes seemed to confirm that belief. But after his own brush with non-existence, and after glimpsing the nature of the Philosopher's Stone, his understanding of magic had been overturned. He abandoned pure voluntarism for what he considered a more perfect system: the soul anchored in the source of magic, the will as an engine drawing in magic, magic nourishing the soul sustaining the body, and the body feeding back into the will, a fourfold, self-perpetuating cycle of soul, will, magic, and body, unending, eternal. He called it the 4-in-1 theory of immortality. By contrast, Nicholas Flamel's longevity, maintained by the external power of the Philosopher's Stone, was a castle on sand. The will did not grow in step with the externally sustained body. The soul and body remained fragile and would ultimately return to dust. Voldemort resolved that he must reclaim all his Horcruxes, reunite his soul fragments, and complete the origin of his will left fractured by division. That would be the true foundation for immortality after his resurrection. Lucius then briefed him on Cornelius Fudge's machinations at Hogwarts, how Fudge had assigned Dolores Umbridge to investigate, and the evidence Umbridge had uncovered, alleging that Dumbledore had been manufacturing child prodigies and accepting bribes. Voldemort's snake-like eyes widened in what might have been genuine surprise. Dumbledore. Corrupt. The absurdity of the notion almost made him laugh. Even someone as powerful as Dumbledore, standing at the summit of the wizarding world, stooping to petty graft and coin? He shook his head, dismissing the idea. This was clearly a smear by that petty prime minister and his cronies to frame Dumbledore. Having himself read the ridiculous reports in the Daily Prophet over the years, Voldemort had only one verdict: nonsense. What is their objective? His voice was as cold as a winter wind in an ice cellar. Umbridge's report has been filed with Minister Fudge, Lucius replied cautiously. They plan to bring Dumbledore before the Wizengamot, use it as a pretext to remove him from the position of headmaster and tarnish his reputation. Fudge hopes I can persuade the other governors to support the motion. Are these the wizards of today? Voldemort sneered, contempt curling his lip. Obsessed with petty political games, they have forgotten the real power at their disposal. They think they can coerce a great wizard with such tricks? He paused, then, recalling Dumbledore, allowed himself a bitter smirk. Still, from what I know of that old man, he may well step back, unlike me. A bloodthirsty light flashed in his eyes as he gave a low, hissing laugh. I will crush them all. Once the noise is silenced, the world will be at peace. Ah! His laugh rang long and cold in the empty drawing room. What he truly failed to understand was Dumbledore himself, possessing such power, yet tolerating the ants and their clumsy politicking before him. The world should not be allowed to decay like this. In Voldemort's view, the rot of the current order justified his cause, which he believed was the only true salvation. As the laughter died away, he asked, precise and controlled once more, when will they act? Fudge still needs to coordinate within the Wizengamot, Lucius estimated carefully. At the earliest, a formal request for trial might be made next month. Very good. A red fire seemed to surge beneath Voldemort's pallid skin. Support them. The day Dumbledore is put on trial will be the day we slip into Hogwarts and reclaim Ravenclaw's diadem. When have I ever accepted bribes? When have I ever accepted bribes? The Wizengamot, meeting room, Ministry of Magic. The Wizengamot, older than the ministry itself, served both as the highest wizarding court and as a parliament. In the plum-robed chamber large enough for 50 members, more than 30 were packed in, a rare turnout, since most attended only part-time. Each robe bore an exquisite silver W on the left breast. In their hands they gripped the same damning report, a dossier on Albus Dumbledore. The air in the room was so thick it felt like you could wring water from it. Merlin's tattered hat. Tiberius Ogden, returned recently from Greece, shook his copy of the report as if it might disintegrate. As editor-in-chief of today's Transfiguration and a leading Transfiguration master, he had been friends with Dumbledore for decades. He could not fathom the allegations. The report claimed Dumbledore had accepted rare magical materials and numerous rare dark arts books in return for pushing a particular student. The idea was absurd. This is outrageous. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, muttered as she reread the paper, her thick brows knit and her monocle sliding down to the tip of her nose. Even she found the suggestion hard to swallow. Barty Crouch, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation and a hard-nosed veteran, sat unusually calm. He scrutinized the pages in silence. The former head of magical law enforcement was no stranger to scandal and had learned the value of restraint. When the papers were finally lowered, Minister Fudge cleared his throat. He put a single, decisive proposal on the table. Suspend Dumbledore immediately from his post as headmaster of Hogwarts and as chief warlock of the Wizengamot, and open a formal case against him. But there are a lot of people involved, Bones cautioned. It won't be simple. Dolores Umbridge, with her saccharine tone and cold smile, piped up quickly. Then summon everyone connected to the case, especially young Roger Lewis. I propose using legilimency on him at once to extract all of Dumbledore's secrets. Legilimency. Bones' monocle nearly flew off. On a 12-year-old? Is that even appropriate? Finding the truth is what matters, Fudge snapped, his voice hard. Some sacrifices are acceptable. Allowing a corrupt official or a dark wizard to hold high office is a disgrace to Britain. The Hogwarts Board of Governors share my view. A ripple of agreement ran through the chamber. Dumbledore's youthful association with Grindelwald was an old shadow, and the presence of dark arts texts made the allegations seem plausible to many. With Voldemort's shadow still looming, no one wanted to risk appearing lenient. Better to be safe than sorry. If Dumbledore had truly fallen, it would be a scandal of international proportions. Rufus Scrimgeour, head of the Auror office, however, wore a dark frown. He had been on the front lines. He had seen what a threat Voldemort could be and had first-hand knowledge of the extraordinary strength of the boy named Roger. Roger's fighting ability was enough to take down an Auror squad. Scrimgeour suspected the report was manufactured, political tampering of the worst sort. He had been asked by Fudge before to polish reports. Calling Roger in and subjecting him to legitimacy struck him as reckless. If things came to blows, he wasn't sure who would be in control. "Minister," Scrimgeour said, his voice low and warned, using legitimacy on Roger Lewis. "That's a little extreme, isn't it?" "A little extreme?" Fudge bristled. "What are the Aurors for? Are we, a room full of wizards, actually afraid of one child?" Under Fudge's pressure, the Wisengamot voted to accept the case against Albus Dumbledore for suspected academic fraud and bribery. They ordered the forced summons of all involved and dispatched a large contingent of Aurors to be ready for any eventuality. It was clear, Fudge was determined to bring Dumbledore down. Hogwarts, headmaster's office. The mood at Hogwarts was just as heavy. Dumbledore had returned, and the gravity of his expression told Roger more than words could. Umbridge's investigations were sweeping and relentless. Everyone could see what she was after. But Dumbledore's concerns were graver. He had uncovered evidence that Voldemort was reclaiming his Horcruxes. The situation was worse than anyone had feared. Professor McGonagall, Professor Snape, Roger, and Remus Lupin were gathered in the office. Dumbledore, exhausted, broke the silence. "To investigate Tom Riddle's Horcruxes, I searched his past in detail," he began. "I found a clue, a sea cave near the orphanage where he grew up. There were traces of powerful magic, but the protective traps have been destroyed and the object that was stored there has already been stolen." He turned to Lupin. "Remus, tell them what you found." Roger felt a cold drop of dread. In the story he knew, when Dumbledore found the cave, the traps were still intact. Someone had beaten them to it. Lupin's face was pale and his clothes more worn than usual, but his voice was steady. "I made discreet inquiries among several major Death Eater families. From the Black family's house elf, Creature, I learned that Voldemort once hid Slytherin's locket in a sea cave. Regulus Black retrieved it and left it at 12 Grimmauld Place. Recently, someone tried to buy it from Creature. After the refusal, the locket was stolen," he continued, voice grave. "There's more. Lucius Malfoy has been acting very suspiciously. Malfoy Manor is shut up tight. Lucius only meets visitors outside the gates, and near the manor, I sensed extremely strong dark arts vibrations." Snape sneered. "The Malfoys have never been short of dark arts baubles." Dumbledore ignored the barb and signaled to Roger to speak. Roger told them about Draco opening the Chamber of Secrets and emphasized that Lucius had somehow known how to open it and the password to waken the basilisk. Dumbledore stood and paced, brow furrowed. "This reminds me of the chamber opening in 1942. Hagrid must have been framed. He isn't a Parselmouth and could not have opened the chamber. The real opener was very likely Tom Riddle himself, the one who reported him." McGonagall's expression grew severe. "Are these events connected?" "I believe so," Dumbledore said. "I also visited the Gaunt Shack. There were magical traces there, though no artifacts. Someone recently removed whatever was kept. I suspect the Gaunt family ring was taken." "Undoubtedly Voldemort," McGonagall said. "Who else would know where that ring was hidden? If he has both the locket and the ring, he is attempting to reassemble his fragmentary soul. What does he intend? How do we stop him?" Roger's thoughts were sharp and impatient. In the original tale, Dumbledore had been frustratingly cautious. Worried that Voldemort's remaining soul pieces might have contingency plans, he refused to strike too quickly. From Roger's point of view, that hesitancy was maddening. Kill him when you find him. If the fragments could be hunted down and destroyed, the threat would be diminished. Why leave a sliver of such a thing alive? A sharp thwack on the window turned everyone's heads. An owl had arrived. Dumbledore untied the letter from its leg, an official summons from the Wizengamot. He scanned the contents, and the rare, crystalline surprise that flashed in the blue of his eyes was unmistakable. He looked at everyone, then fixed on Roger. Confusion, disbelief, then a flash of anger crossed his face. "Roger," Dumbledore said, voice edged with something like wounded incredulity, "what did you tell the Ministry of Magic? When have I ever accepted a bribe?" 69. Framing Hogsmeade, on the edge of the Black Lake. October wind sliced through the Scottish Highlands with a bone-deep chill. The village streets were nearly empty. Even stray dogs had melted away into warm corners. Only a gaunt black dog drifted like a ghost around the outskirts. By the lake shore, two figures in heavy winter cloaks stood in silence, staring through the thin mist at the hazy silhouette of Hogwarts. Voldemort's shape seemed to melt into the shadows as he left the water's edge without a sound, moving that uncanny way he had of slipping through the cracks between the world and whatever lay beyond. "Joel," his voice whispered, as calm and cold as a knife, "do you know that Hogwarts itself is alive? Time has made people forget that, and they have forgotten, too, the true nature of power." On the gravel path outside the castle, Fred and George Weasley were in the middle of one of their latest experiments, brandishing excited hands and wearing two peculiar pairs of spectacles. Pale blue lenses gleamed faintly in the weak autumn sun. "Fred, did you put the sapphire on the left one in backward?" George squinted. "Why's Roger's image upside down? The sound's all garbled, like it's underwater." "Merlin's soggy socks. Just flip it over," Fred scoffed. The double vision spectacles had cost them. Sapphires were expensive and difficult to source, but their prismatic properties made the lenses almost transparent, with only a faint blue tint. Worn properly, the glasses could share another wearer's vision and sound in real time. They'd conned Roger into wearing a pair at the Ministry to test them. "No, Roger's wand's been taken." George's voice went urgent. "The trial's starting. Give me the glasses." He lunged for the spectacles on Fred's face. "Hey, don't grab." Fred laughed and dodged, and the brothers tussled. When they stopped, hands empty, the glasses were gone. "George, pull them out, quick. Roger's in the courtroom," Fred shouted. "I swear I didn't take them." George panicked and began rummaging through his pockets and Fred's. Voldemort had barely deigned to glance at the Weasleys as he drifted past, but the name Roger slid into his mind like a lever. He paused long enough for his gaze to fall on the abandoned glasses. They slipped into his pale hand soundlessly. Cold fingers stroked the frames as his crimson eyes glinted with interest. "Tracking charm, hominum revelio, supersensory charm, mirroring enchantment, and the trace," he murmured. "Heh, they even used the principles of priori incantatem. Ingenious design." A small, cruel smile curved his lips. Without hesitation, he perched the glasses on the bridge of his nose. The world shifted. A different field of vision opened up, and a clear voice poured straight into his mind. On the 10th floor of the Ministry of Magic, the courtroom smelled of cold marble and tension. Roger stepped into it, knowing something was wrong. Aurors had confiscated the wands of everyone involved, his, Harry's, Ron's, Hermione's, Wayne's, all taken. Fortunately, he had prepared. A plain silver-gray ring hugged his pinky finger. The magic ring he'd refined was another form of wand and had several discrete uses. The searching Aurors had missed it, their attention focused on the obvious. They hadn't even bothered to inspect his or Harry's glasses, certainly not in front of Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore entered the courtroom with his usual composed dignity. Cornelius Fudge stood to one side, crimson with anger and looking every inch the petty bureaucrat. The benches were steep and lined with wizards who all looked like they carried weighty, dangerous things at their belts. Fudge sat on the high seat with other members of the Wizengamot presiding over the proceedings. "No!" Harry's roar split the room. "Dumbledore is trying to stop Voldemort from coming back. And you're framing him. This is a despicable setup." Most faces in the room were written with skepticism and disgust. Fudge barked a derisive laugh. "Did you all hear that? You know who has been dead for years. This lad is talking lunacy. Clearly that's what Hogwarts has been teaching." His fat features flushed with self-satisfaction. "We will now hear from the applicant. Mr. Roger Lewis," Amelia Bones announced in a steady, sharp voice. Roger walked to the witness stand. Dumbledore glanced at him from across the stand, blue eyes behind half-moon spectacles knit with concern. concern for the danger Voldemort represented and for how Fudge was handling matters. Roger's resentment flared. Dumbledore stood there worrying over diplomacy and procedure when he ought to be firmer. If Dumbledore had been more forceful, if he'd been both minister and headmaster at once, who would have dared try to undermine him? Now the Ministry's doubts would only hand Voldemort breathing space. If things went badly, Voldemort might return, and then half the people in this courtroom would be finished. A cold voice slid into the room and into Roger's head like oil over ice. It spoke without warning, elegant and hissing. "What a ridiculous little trial, Roger," it said. "They say my reign was terror, but they do not see the greater evil, that these fools hold positions of power. Is that not the true abyss of despair?" Heat drained from Roger's blood. The anger that had been boiling stopped halfway and turned to ice. Cold beads of sweat trickled down his spine. The glasses that should have been relaying the twins' feed were now channeling Voldemort's sight and voice. Roger fumbled with his spectacles and willed up another patch of vision. He saw the 8th floor of Hogwarts, the entrance to the Room of Requirement. The realization hit like a blow. Voldemort had slipped into the school and was after Ravenclaw's diadem. While everyone at the Ministry squabbled, the Dark Lord was moving. Roger could see it all too clearly. Voldemort watching this absurd trial through stolen lenses, laughing at the chaos. He pictured the Dark Lord changing tactics. Instead of a brazen assault as in the stories, he would hide behind bureaucrats like Fudge, using the Ministry's machinery to discredit Dumbledore. Once resurrected, Voldemort could manipulate the Ministry to whitewash him, to call himself a savior while making Dumbledore the villain. That was the cruelest kind of power, political, insidious, poisonous. "Roger?" Dumbledore's quiet voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. "Shut up, Dumbledore!" Fudge snapped, leaning forward with an ingratiating smile that tried to be gentle and failed. "Child, don't be afraid, and don't let yourself be influenced by anyone. We are here to hear the truth. Tell us everything you know, the faking, the bribery. Was it not? 70. Legilimency and the basilisk. Bullshit." Roger felt fury boil up so violently he could taste it. In the little heads-up in his spectacles, Lord Voldemort was already slipping into the Room of Requirement. Voldemort would soon have Ravenclaw's diadem, the Horcrux. The thought that the Dark Lord was watching this farce from the shadows and enjoying it made Roger's blood run hot. He had a bad feeling Voldemort might really come back this time. And what were the Ministry officials doing? Squabbling among themselves while the world burned. The Ministry was enormous and powerful. 90% of Britain's valuable magical plants, creatures, and rare minerals were locked in their vaults. They could afford to staff a room full of incompetents and keep over 1,000 Aurors on payroll. Their warehouses held treasures from goblin-forged time-turners to a hall of prophecy crammed with orbs. How else had Voldemort been allowed to practically blot out the sun once before? Because most of the people in the Ministry were ornamental, performing polite wand-waving for show. Or worse, cowards with razor-sharp claws for internal power plays. Fudge's whole career was proof. He'd replaced Bagnold, and no one rose that far without careful maneuvering. In Fudge's hands, black became white, and right could be turned into wrong with a few lies and a willful twisting of context. Roger didn't want to be another pawn in their petty politics. He let the swear fly like a grenade in the solemn Wizengamot. No one expected a child to defy the court so brazenly. Fudge went livid, his face flecked with red. He'd like to tear Roger to pieces, but he forced himself to glare at Umbridge as if the failure were her fault. Umbridge forced on a smile and stepped forward. "My dear, what do you mean by that? Are you afraid of retaliation?" she cooed, then glanced at Dumbledore like a viper. "Here, under the protection of the Ministry of Magic, no one can harm you. Tell the truth, and you will be perfectly safe." "I said bullshit. It never happened. What is there to tell?" Roger shouted over her syrupy voice. "Do something useful. Minister Fudge, you're framing Albus Dumbledore, and I warn you, Lord Voldemort could return at any moment." Another lunatic. Another one. Fudge trembled with fury and panic. The courtroom erupted. They were stunned that Roger had publicly ripped away Fudge's mask, and even more terrified by the name he'd said. Umbridge's smile collapsed. She shrieked in pure desperation. "Minister, we must use legilimency on him. That will be most efficient." Yes, immediately, Fudge barked. A squad of trained aurors flowed forward, led by a stern Albert. Scrimgeour followed, sweating, his eyes flicking to Dumbledore. He smelled trouble. Begin, Albert, Umbridge commanded, high and shrill. We need the truth. How this boy bribed Dumbledore, how they faked exam results, their secret dealings, everything. In Roger Spectacle's view, Voldemort had already taken Ravenclaw's diadem. He had said, coldly, "Goodbye," and removed the glasses. He looked as if he had more important matters to attend. Roger couldn't waste any more time. These bureaucrats were professionals at character assassination. Arguing within their game only let them keep the upper hand. He needed to flip the table. He needed an undeniable fact, something that would slap their arrogance down and force them to admit how ridiculous they were. What was more damning than accusations of faked grades? A living, perfect instance of a magical creature created by transfiguration, a feat thought impossible for millennia. Coincidentally, Roger had just finished mapping the basilisk's magical patterns. If he wanted to, he could present a fresh basilisk form and literally stare these infighting politicians to death. Dumbledore's voice cut through the chaos. "I will not allow you to mistreat my student, Dolores." Calm, but his wand was already in his hand, and his bright blue eyes burned with an anger Roger had never seen before. The old headmaster's stance cooled some of the fervor. Umbridge shrank under the blade of his gaze. "Oh, I mean, of course, it was only routine." Her words died in a gasp. The witness stand where Roger had been standing was empty. In its place reared a basilisk so enormous the courtroom felt suddenly small. Dark green scales shone with a wet, metallic sheen. Its body nearly brushed the ceiling. Most terrifying were the eyes, huge, yellow, searchlight bright. No one dared meet that gaze. "Merlin's beard. Where did a basilisk come from?" Someone cried. Panic ignited. Even veteran wizards had one reflex: flee. The crowd surged for the exits because everyone knew a basilisk killed with its look. A few reacted as they were trained, shutting their eyes, drawing wands, firing spells blindly. The aurors, drilled to respond, shouted in unison, "Petrificus totalis!" Several stunning jinxes lanced toward the beast. Against most creatures, those spells would have been enough, but they glanced off the basilisk's armored scales like rain off a roof. Even worse, the basilisk lifted its head and a blinding beam of light speared from its mouth. The bench it struck twisted and bulged, erupting into a writhing mass of devil's snare that blocked the exits. "This basilisk can transfigure too?" someone breathed. Hermione's eyes went wide. "Devil's snare. It's Roger. Roger transformed." She hauled Harry, Ron, and Wayne back from under a table. Ron's jaw hung slack, then he jabbed a finger at the serpent and spluttered. Why didn't he do this at school and show that old toad Umbridge? Maybe he was still researching it, Hermione guessed. Trapped in the courtroom, watching spells fall off the beast like raindrops, the guildroom fell into a cold silence when a voice rolled through the chamber, huge, bell-like, tinged with a non-human hiss. "Now tell me, what kind of academic fraud would produce a magical creature like a basilisk?" 71. Candy. It talks, Fudge shrieked from under the overturned desk, eyes squeezed shut. Which dark wizard cooked up this monster? What's the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures even doing if something this dangerous can slither into the ministry? I want a full investigation. I'll have the idiot responsible sacked. Before his words had finished, a thick serpent tail, nimble as a crane's jib, crashed down and flipped the desk Fudge had been hiding under. It coiled round his waist and hoisted him into the air like a fish dragged out of water. "Now then, dear Minister Fudge," the basilisk rumbled in a deceptively playful tone, "open your eyes and take a good look. Tell me, do you really think I'd need to bribe anyone?" The sight of the colossal serpent dangling the Minister for Magic jolted the rest of the courtroom into alertness. Harry, no, Roger, swallowed and tugged Ron's sleeve. "Better keep your voice down when you badmouth him. One day he might just glare at you." Not far away, Umbridge stood rooted to the spot, mouth agape, looking every inch the helpless bureaucrat. Clearly terrified by the legendary monster, she was equally distraught at the consequences. As investigating officer, she now had a report its every accusation the serpent had shredded. If Dumbledore chose to press the matter, she could be charged with false accusation, packed off to Azkaban, and the ministry forced to pay massive compensation. White-haired Tiberius Ogden burst from behind an overturned stool, knobby fingers trembling as he adjusted his spectacles and circled the basilisk in wonder. By Merlin, is this a polymorphic transformation of a magical creature? Perfect, absolutely perfect. The Holy Grail wizards have pursued for 1,000 years. Actual magical creature transformation realized. Tiberius Ogden, editor-in-chief of today's Transfiguration and one of the few living Transfiguration masters, had the authority and knowledge to recognize the spell before him. Transfiguration, he reminded those nearby, had 3 tiers: body, soul, and will. Most spells change only the body, the vast majority of Transfiguration. Some touch the soul, anomalies and lycanthropy, for instance. Werewolves undergo a change that corrupts the soul and can even touch the will. The bodily shift follows and is only partly controllable. Anomalies, by contrast, can feel animal instincts while retaining a human will. Their consciousness is not fully transformed. The most mysterious realm was the will, home to the darkest forces, blood curses and curses of torment. A blood curse often begins by eroding the body, then warps the soul, and finally subverts the will, irreversibly turning its victim into an animal. Wizards had yet to plumb that depth. Many believed that achieving true transformation into a magical creature required penetrating the will itself. At that moment, Ogden could not say which tier young Roger's transformation had reached. He spun toward Dumbledore, his voice cracking with excitement. "Albus, you should have brought the boy straight to us." This year's Most Promising Newcomer award was a joke in comparison. Dumbledore gave a helpless shrug. "I did tell you, Tiberius." He cast a glance at the stern faces gathered around the Wizengamot. "And your reply? Something about advising the Wizengamot to reconsider my status as Chief Warlock?" His gaze shifted to Fudge, still wrapped in the serpent's tail, white as parchment, but finally daring to open his eyes. A cold glint flashed in Dumbledore's blue eyes, though his voice remained mild. "As for you, respected Minister Fudge, if you insist there was a bribe, why not try offering one yourself? Perhaps, when he was still a little snake, your odds would have been better." By the time Roger hurried back to Hogwarts, the Ministry's mess no longer felt like his problem. The Wizengamot's Council of 50 would doubtless have a word with Cornelius Fudge about the spectacle. Far more important was the urgent need to assess Roger's jaw-dropping polymorphic transformation and the magical creature transformation that had stunned the entire hall. After all, Roger had filed no application. Asking a basilisk for paperwork would be lunacy. Tiberius Ogden was already busy persuading his colleagues to issue a collective opinion and planning to withdraw today's Transfiguration's freshly minted Most Promising Newcomer award, a move certain to bruise the century-old journal's pride. Ogden knew better than most. If this year's award didn't go to Roger, today's Transfiguration would lose the last shred of its academic credibility. He was already planning to invite Roger to submit the groundbreaking paper on magical creature polymorphic transformation. It would open an entirely new frontier for the field. Some members of the Wizengamot even tentatively suggested that, in time, Roger might be invited to join their ranks. Given his youth and circumstances, few rallied to the idea. No matter how dazzling the prodigy, time would still need to temper him. The Ministry, meanwhile, had taken the hardest hit. Fudge's painstakingly crafted image of shrewd competence, 6 months in the making, had shattered on the courtroom floor. He would never admit fault. Instead, with practiced ease, he pinned the blame on Dolores Umbridge, the senior undersecretary who had overseen the case, publicly stripping her of her robes and shunting Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, into the vacancy. Though the formal dismissal of a high-ranking official like Umbridge would take time, her political career was effectively over, for now. No one doubted Fudge could make it stick. Rufus Scrimgeour was appointed the new head of magical law enforcement. The aftershocks of the Ministry's earthquake were far from spent. Back at Hogwarts, life went on, except for the Weasley twins' claim that a pair of spectacles had vanished. It now seemed certain Lord Voldemort had infiltrated the school and made off with Ravenclaw's diadem. He was clearly racing against time. So when Roger followed Dumbledore into the headmaster's office, he spoke plainly. "Professor Dumbledore," Roger said, voice grave, "aren't you worried Voldemort might recover every Horcrux?" Dumbledore didn't answer right away. He strolled over to the familiar dish of sweets on his desk, selected a lemon drop with unhurried grace, popped it into his mouth, and then turned. Behind his half-moon spectacles, his blue eyes regarded Roger with the usual kindly, knowing smile. He's racing to reclaim the Horcruxes. He must be preparing some terrifying resurrection rite, Roger pressed, voice rising. If he succeeds this time, the entire wizarding world will drown in blood. The trial had clearly exhausted Dumbledore. He picked up a fizzing Whizbee and savored it slowly, as though it were the rarest delicacy. Roger's frustration flared. He slammed his fist on the desk. Headmaster, Voldemort retrieving a Horcrux is extremely dangerous. Dumbledore remained unruffled. He licked sugar from his fingertips with leisurely contentment, as if attending a tea-time soiree. Seeing Roger's agitation, he slid the candy dish toward him. Relax, my dear boy. We've just endured a rather intense farce. Have a sweet, soothe your nerves and fortify yourself. Roger stared in disbelief. Moments ago in the dock, the headmaster had not looked the least perturbed. More than that, he half suspected Dumbledore had regretted missing the spectacle. Despite his inward grumbling, Roger slumped back into the armchair and stuffed a fistful of sweets into his mouth. The cloying taste was cut short by the image of Dumbledore's unflappable calm. It's been ages. Why not share afternoon tea? Dumbledore suggested, kindly. With a flick of his wand, a tall glass of bubbling iced drink appeared beside Roger. Roger took a cautious sip. Cool, tart fizz burst across his tongue, magically balancing the candy's sweetness and leaving a crisp, refreshing aftertaste. His eyes brightened. Dumbledore looked utterly spent. In recent months, he had scoured the country, sought out old friends and ancient magics, braved countless perils, and finally endured the Ministry's farce. The toll was plain. Do help yourself. There's plenty more, he said, flourishing his wand as though unlocking a trove. Lemon drops, chocolate frogs, raspberry tarts, and fizzing Whizbees. In the blink of an eye, the wide desk brimmed with colorful, fragrant confections. Outside, the Scottish autumn wind howled past the castle turrets while bright incendio flames danced in the hearth and the flue flashed with visitation requests. Yet the weary old wizard and the drained young one focused solely on their sugary feast. Green fire crackled in the headmaster's office grate. A steady stream of people waited to see Dumbledore. Roger was almost as popular. A dozen owls swooped in one after another and dumped a pile of letters at his feet. Awards, commissions, interview requests. He'd become famous, at least among the top 50 wizards of the Wizengamot. After chewing a few sweets, Roger's head cleared. Even Dumbledore didn't seem worried. Why should he? Roger had twice foiled Lord Voldemort's resurrection. They were mortal enemies, but Roger could look after himself now. If the bastard came back, he wouldn't be the one crying. Seeing Roger calm, Dumbledore spoke slowly. This summer, I visited many people, including Professor Slughorn, Tom's old mentor. As a student, Tom Riddle was probably already planning to make 7 Horcruxes. He picked up a chocolate frog. Of course, I believe only 4 or 5 truly succeeded. And, he paused, looking Roger in the eye, Tom himself likely doesn't know there is an accidental, what one might call a soul shard, living inside Harry. Wouldn't he try to retrieve the rest and finish the set? Roger pressed. He can't finish it, Dumbledore said, spooning ice cream with the sort of certainty that made argument pointless. As long as Harry remains under my roof at Hogwarts, he cannot reclaim that peace. Roger thought of the encounter at Nicholas Flamel's. Voldemort had seemed calmer, more methodical, perhaps because he'd begun reclaiming Horcrux shards. That was connected, then? Dumbledore's face sobered, and for the first time the old sorrow settled over him. Yes, that was my fault. I taught him the idea of the singularity of will, but he misunderstood what a wizard's will truly is. Misunderstood? Roger nearly choked. Much of what he had learned from Voldemort had been about soul theory. He'd assumed Voldemort had championed it. How could the man be wrong? Or had he withheld something, accidentally teaching the correct lesson by mistake? Dumbledore nodded. Creating a Horcrux forcibly tears the soul. Each tear makes emotions more extreme, which gives the illusion that the will becomes purer or stronger. I think Tom fooled himself into thinking the more splits he made, the stronger he'd become. But that's not true? Roger stared. So Voldemort had been digging his own grave. If he had known the truth, he he might have been undone by it. Exactly. Dumbledore folded his hands. Multiple splits push emotions to extremes, but they shatter the will and weaken the mind. Ancient wizards experimented with this too. Most met miserable ends. Then why did he do it? Roger asked, incredulous. Dumbledore's lips curved, weary. Young people always imagine they are the exceptions, that they can break the rules and remake things. They misread risk for opportunity. Don't look at me like that, Roger waved a hand. I don't have that kind of hubris. I'm not courting pain. That's not exactly my worry. Dumbledore smiled as he popped another sweet into his mouth, his blue eyes, magnified behind his half-moon spectacles, fixed on Roger sharply. I'm thinking, perhaps the task of dealing with Voldemort could be entrusted largely to you. There seems to be a unique channel between you and him. Roger swallowed. The old man was observant. He had noticed Roger's secret contact with Voldemort in the courtroom and had kept it in mind. Roger pulled out the special spectacles he'd, and the Weasley twins cobbled together while dabbling in alchemy, and explained. Dumbledore turned them over, admiration plain on his face. A wonderfully ingenious design, he said, reluctant to hand them back. I'll make you a new pair later. Why a pair wasn't important. What mattered was that Dumbledore's mood had brightened. So Tom's path of splitting the soul is a dead end, Dumbledore continued, tone darkening. Even if he tries to turn back, the price will be horrific. What sort of price? Roger asked. Dumbledore's eyes went distant for a moment. You haven't answered the key question yourself. Why aren't you more worried that Voldemort could recover some of his Horcruxes? You only asked if he could complete the set, but what if he retrieves several and regains enough power? Dumbledore pushed his half-moon glasses up. He can only keep following the Torn Soul Road. A remnant soul seeking revival, without a stable, mighty source like the Philosopher's Stone, has no easy path. At least, I cannot conceive of a simple spell that would do it. And if he truly tries to turn back, Dumbledore added slowly, if he attempts to gather those scattered shards and mend his fractured will and soul, the threshold for revival might be lower, possibly even without the stone. But piecing split soul shards back together is no easier than reviving a remnant soul, he said, taking a leisurely sip of fizzy soda. With a soul already shredded, revival becomes worse than impossible. Roger leaned forward, fascinated. Why not? Suppose he insists. What happens then? Dumbledore smiled sadly. Revival magic, Roger, is among the deepest and most complex branches of magic, far harder than any one spell. It involves ritual, soul work, transfiguration, healing. Even if one prepares perfectly, the danger is terrifying. He set the cup down, expression grave. And the core of that magic is the soul itself. If the soul is splintered, attempts at revival will aggravate the fractures until the whole thing collapses. He shook his head. Imagine one consciousness torn into two separate beings. No one would welcome a twin constantly plotting to replace him. Such enmity springs from the soul's depths. Only one can survive. Roger, Dumbledore's blue eyes bored into him through the lenses. You take soul magic far too lightly. Toying with the soul is toying with yourself. That's why I never approved of your dabbling in those darkest arts. You can't handle it. 73. Walking with renowned teachers. Again, P.S. Took a day off, feeling a bit guilty. Updating first thing this morning. A master truly is a master. A few words cut right to the heart of the matter. Roger immediately pulled out his pocket notebook and scribbled. The man opposite him was one of only two soul masters in the modern age, and his ideas were no less profound than Lord Voldemort's. Since the chance to learn from him was rare, Roger followed up quickly. Then, what happens if the other split-off self is destroyed? What would occur? That touches the essence of the soul, Dumbledore said, picking up a piece of treacle tart and taking a casual bite before offering a view that upended conventional thinking. Many say magic comes from the soul. Wrong. The soul itself does not contain magic. Roger froze. The theory Voldemort had taught him was completely different. He felt like a student caught between two academic giants with opposing doctrines and wasn't sure which to trust. Dumbledore seemed to notice his confusion and continued before he could speak. Did Tom tell you the soul is the bridge between the magical world and the material world? That's not quite right. He paused. The soul is actually the bond between the will and the material world. If the soul and the will are split that far, then whether one destroys the other or they're forced back together, the bond will be severely damaged. The result is mental collapse and the disintegration of rationality. Even if you don't destroy the other, he went on, making a gluing motion with his fingers, forcibly patching a split soul creates only a shaky, dangerous bridge that can't bear much, and its lifespan is greatly shortened. Dumbledore thought a moment, then offered a more vivid metaphor. It's a bit like what Muggles call schizophrenia. When a soul is split into several pieces, multiple independent wills can sprout. Usually one will dominates and suppresses the others, but under certain circumstances, those suppressed wills can arise. Then it becomes difficult to tell which is the true main will. However, he added, letting his tone turn almost mischievous, this state of being split isn't entirely without advantages. Roger's pen hovered. There can be advantages? Imagine, Dumbledore's eyes twinkled, you have multiple independent wills originating from yourself. That means you can cast multiple spells simultaneously. He went on, sobering immediately as if to prevent himself from teaching a child dangerous tricks. Of course, the goals of those split wills are unpredictable. A stray thought could trigger a killing curse. That's how the two-headed giants of the ancient times often met their end. The two heads fought each other, and ancient wizards didn't have to expend much effort to kill them. Roger's eyes lit up. Multicasting. This was the secret. The dangers Dumbledore mentioned could be researched and mitigated later. All right, class time's over, Dumbledore said, wiping his hands and changing the subject. Now, shouldn't you tell me about the basilisk? This old headmaster really was a cancer, an affable old soul with an off-the-charts need to know everything and a suspicious streak. He wanted details about every little thing. Roger didn't hold back. He explained finding the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets and, as with the Cerberus before, how he had unraveled its transformation. To be honest, he said, though the basilisk is a powerful magical creature, constructing its transfiguration form was simpler and used much less magic. It felt not entirely like a normal magical creature. Transforming into a basilisk had been easier than transforming into a Cerberus. He hadn't needed a potion, only his own magic. Exactly, Dumbledore nodded. It's a product of ritual magic. In essence, the basilisk is a living spell. A basilisk as a spell hit Roger like a thunderbolt. He remembered the legend of its birth, a rooster's egg hatched beneath a toad, an ancient ritual. Its fatal weakness, the crowing of a rooster, was, from a ritual magic perspective, a perfect counter-ritual. But Roger, Dumbledore's tone shifted into a warning, you seem to rely too much on transfiguration. It isn't a long-term solution. It can't be your only crutch. You mean the Amorphous charm? Roger thought of what Voldemort had mentioned. Precisely. Master that counterspell, and even if you turn into a dragon, you can be forced back to your original form instantly. Roger had other life-saving options, like the Killing Chain Curse, but he wasn't about to show off in front of the headmaster. He only half smirked. I can't help it, headmaster. I began learning magic with the 3 Unforgivable Curses. The world of magic is vast, Dumbledore advised gently. It reaches far beyond the dark arts. You should explore broader fields. For instance, that duplication charm of yours was intriguing. Interest lit in his eyes. Although I can sense traces of soul magic in it, it isn't dark arts itself. I was too busy to talk earlier. Would you demonstrate it now? With my experience, I might give you suggestions for improvement. Of course. Roger drew his wand and tapped an empty chair in the headmaster's office. The principle is using my magic circuit as a template to simulate a temporary virtual soul and attach it to the transformed object. The downside is it's too fragile, not very strong, and ultimately useless. The chair twisted and rearranged itself, forming into a double that looked exactly like Roger. Dumbledore watched the duplicate with interest and raised an eyebrow. It carries your soul aura. He knew there was no way in the wizarding world to see a soul directly, only to sense it, so the deceit of Roger's technique was impressive. Yes, it's just a virtual soul, Roger explained. The magic circuit copies my own, but it's temporary. Once the magic runs out, it dissipates. He felt a little discouraged at Dumbledore's comment that the technique had potential but was too weak and drained too much magic. Suddenly, Dumbledore's eyes narrowed, as if using some hidden detection charm. A rare look of shock crossed his face. Wait, this magic seems able to fool the killing curse? Roger was stunned. As expected of one of the greatest white wizards of the age, Dumbledore saw what others missed. It seems you've walked a very unique and exceptionally effective path, Dumbledore said with appreciation. I'm afraid there isn't much more I can guide you on. He tapped a lemon drop on the desk with his wand. The candy swelled and shifted, becoming another lifelike Dumbledore, even imitating that distinctive soul aura. Roger applauded involuntarily. However, Dumbledore went on with a smile, to me a duplicate like this is almost always transparent. Roger frowned. This was even more impressive than Voldemort's work. Why? Because, Dumbledore said, waving his wand, and a nearby bookcase popped open with a bang as a beautifully bound book flew down. Your duplicate lacks the thoughts and memories it should have. The book landed in front of Roger. The cover was deep blue silk with a line of silver-embroidered cursive, My Advanced Legilimency Research Notes. The title page bore the signature Albus Dumbledore in a young, elegant hand. These are my notes from when I was young and studying legilimency, Dumbledore said, his gaze distant with memory. At the time, I wanted to probe minds, so I started deep research into this magic. Your duplicate's flaw is obvious to anyone who knows the soul. No thoughts, no memories. His tone grew serious. But legilimency and the memory charm are two sides of the same coin. Neither must be abused. If you overuse them, you risk being lost in the torrent of other people's memories. Your will could quietly dissipate within them. Roger understood suddenly. Advanced legilimency could not only read but manipulate and modify memories. The cost of abusing it was terrifying. The caster could lose their self, their will could split or be extinguished. You can take this book and study it, Dumbledore said solemnly. Ask me anytime if you don't understand something, and remember, do not abuse it. Roger hugged the book to his chest, eyes bright, and nodded vigorously. I understand, Headmaster. Chapter 74, A Third Resurrection. The next afternoon after classes, Roger, glasses perched on his nose, walked into the great hall on the first floor. A full day of lessons had left him ravenous. The hall buzzed with an energy that was more than the usual after-school chatter. Everyone seemed to be talking about the headmaster's business at the ministry. Ever since word had leaked that Roger could transform into a basilisk, students treated him as if he were Salazar Slytherin reborn, viewing him through a dark wizard filter. Add to that Roger's dislike of being interrupted while reading, and most of the crowd had drifted to the Gryffindor table to listen to Ron Weasley narrate their ministry adventure with sparkling eyes. Though the core of his story was how Roger had taught Minister Fudge a lesson, Ron ended every episode with, I was just about to do that too, as if that proved his indispensable contribution. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy scowled with envy, imagining that with Lucius as his father, he would have acted far more boldly than Harry or Ron. Ron embellished so wildly he didn't even notice his rat scampering out, much to Hermione Granger's alarm. Don't you think he's too loud? She muttered, clutching her books and sliding over to the Hufflepuff table, right beside Roger. He's advertising for me. Why would I object? Roger said, smiling faintly. But he crams himself into every sentence. It's childish. Hermione rolled her eyes, ignored him, and buried her nose in a book. Roger gave a thin, private smile. Free publicity was still publicity, even if others tried to steal a little glory. Buzz, buzz. His glasses vibrated. Roger hesitated, then flicked on the visual function. In the field of view stood Lord Voldemort. Congratulations, Roger. Youngest ever Order of Merlin, first class. I would have liked to offer my felicitations in person. Voldemort's image came from a wind-swept cliff with the gray North Sea behind him. It was an odd place to be, and an odder moment to call. Why the coast instead of attending to his resurrection? What was he up to? Roger slipped into the corridor before answering, half joking, half probing. You're welcome anytime, Professor. Bring a gift. I'll be waiting at Hogwarts. The elegance on the other end vanished. The single word waiting seemed to choke him. I will. Once I return, I'll come to Hogwarts myself. The vision cut off. Roger narrowed his eyes and replayed the image. He had ruined Voldemort's resurrection twice. Such hatred did not fade. This sudden theatrical call felt like a probe, an effort to learn where Roger was and what state he was in. Ritual magic could be sabotaged, and Voldemort would be cautious. Roger almost flung the glasses away. Rituals needed links: blood, hair, bone, soul, some mystical connection. The call might be nothing more than a test. On the cliff, Voldemort let the glasses fall into Joel's hands. "Hold these. Stay here until the ritual is done," he instructed. With a crack, he vanished. An instant later, he stood in the deep cellar of Malfoy Manor. On the central dais, a grotesque rite was underway. Around Voldemort gathered figures who were, in his mind, pieces of himself given form, fragments of a soul scattered, and now being hunted down and reunited. Two of them were boys of 15 or 16. One idly fingered a battered notebook. The other spun a heavy gold ring between elegant fingers. Arrogance sat on their handsome faces, as if the world were dust beneath their feet. The sight of Voldemort turned that arrogance into slavish respect that to him looked serpentine and false. Two slightly older youths, about 19, stood nearby, one cradling an ornate golden goblet, the other wearing a diadem that shimmered with borrowed cleverness. They were eager and brash, their deference more believable, but still undercut by reckless ambition. A man who was painfully like a younger Voldemort sat close by with an ancient locket at his throat. Power seethed off him in waves, though not yet at the Lord's former height. His bearing was triumphant rather than deferential. Quirrell and Lucius Malfoy huddled nervously in a corner. Voldemort's eyes swept the assembly with contempt. Once every Horcrux was returned, he would be whole. He had spared nothing to guarantee this success. He had ordered Lucius to shut down the alchemy workshop and divert all household resources to tracking Dumbledore's movements for 3 days. Joel had been sent around London to stage a string of dark wizard attacks, distractions meant to pull the Ministry and Dumbledore's attention away. Voldemort himself had even contacted Roger to verify his location. After days of crossing Britain, double-checking every detail, Voldemort was sure Dumbledore had been kept blind. The ritual could begin. Quirrell, desperate and greedy for recognition, had gone to the Albanian forests to find what remained of his master's shattered soul and schemed every means to restore Voldemort's power. Now, with a cruel smile, he let loose a viridian poison mist through the cellar. Thousands of imprisoned muggles writhed as the concocted death force seeped from their bodies into the rite. Quirrell steered that death. He believed he had earned his reward. He had abandoned everything, his position at Hogwarts, his savings, certain that he would be the chief architect of this resurrection. Harvest time had come. Lucius stood watch outside and sealed the manor with wards at Voldemort's command. The Malfoys had profited handsomely from a new invention, the quick rite charm, which had become more popular and valuable than expected. After Cornelius Fudge's reputation collapsed following the headmaster's trial and the daily profit piled on, the minister's grip had weakened. When Fudge learned of the quick rite charm, he had offered ministry resources to promote it in return for backing. Lucius, eager, had complied. Now Lucius was servile, grateful and terrified in equal measure. But as the rift to the magical world yawned and the rite peered into the seam between life and death, Voldemort's face did not brighten with triumph. Confusion and a barely suppressed fury creased his brow. Not all the Horcruxes had returned. One piece was missing, and worse, he had no recollection of which one. The missing shard kept his core will from reuniting perfectly. These fragments, separated for years and the original soul once mortally harmed, now carried fissures that could not be easily mended. It was as if some part of him had split into rival wills. Each fragment resented being forced to submit. Instead of melding neatly into a single dominant will, the pieces clawed and fought, feeding on the power that should have bolstered the main soul. If that had been the only problem, the ritual would have failed, and could be tried again once the missing Horcrux was found. But the cellar's air trembled, and something worse unfolded. Under Quirrell's slack-jawed horror, from the heart of the rite 5 Tom Riddles, 5 separate Voldemorts, slowly rose. The primary soul lay like tar on the altar, a sticky black thing, while 5 newly formed versions of him fixed cold, greedy eyes on it. Instead of the universe bending to his will, a savage struggle for dominance had begun from within his own fragmented essence. 75. Maintaining popularity, England, Wiltshire, Malfoy Manor. Once a stately lordly residence ringed by immaculate gardens, fountains, and white peacocks, Malfoy Manor now lay in ruins. Powerful wards still clung to the estate, but the house itself had been ripped apart by a single terrible clash. Lord Voldemort against his own scattered soul fragments. Lucius Malfoy remembered emerging from the cellar and standing watch by the wrought iron gate, every sense straining for movement. Then boom! A deafening blast detonated behind him. For a frantic instant, his heart leapt with hope. My lord has succeeded! He spun around, only for the sight to freeze his blood. A vast crater gaped where the garden had been. In the tangle of torn earth and shredded blossoms, 6 figures of Lord Voldemort stood, each one a perfect, terrible mirror of the other. The 6 of them began to tear one another apart. Before Lucius could think, explosions and sheets of blinding spell light obliterated generations of ancestral halls. Rains of rubble and dust buried what had been the manor's splendor. Chaotic currents of magic crackled through broken walls and shattered stone. Every inch of the place wore the scars of devastation. At the lip of a sunken crater, Lucius was dragging Professor Quirrell, Quirrell's battered body, ribs crushed and bones broken, sobbing, "My lord, how do you feel?" Quirrell's eyes snapped open. Within those pupils, overlapping twisted shadows flickered. Their gaze, cold and hard as ice, found Lucius and held him. Lucius's scalp prickled. He had no idea which of the warring fragments had won, or which of the assembled masters was looking back at him. Instincts honed by years of survival under Voldemort flared. In the space of a heartbeat, he cleared every doubt from his face and broke into an almost grotesque ecstasy. "My lord, to see you safe, delighted, utterly delighted." Something in the manner of the look changed. The other 5 fragments had been crushed. Voldemort's mind cleared. He sat up slowly, his pallid face unreadable. The resurrection had failed, spectacularly. One piece of soul was missing. Where had the flaw occurred? Where had the lost fragment gone? There was only one memory that fit. The night the killing curse rebounded and had torn him from his body. If any part of his soul had gone astray, it had to be bound to that boy. Decision hardening like steel, he spoke in a voice of shards. "Contact Gilderoy Lockhart. Use whatever means necessary. Bring him to me. I want him." Crack. Voldemort vanished in a whip of apparition, leaving Lucius standing amid the toppled bones of his home, the evening wind stirring dust over ruined marble. Far away at Hogwarts, Roger knew nothing of the upheaval at Malfoy Manor. He was wrestling instead with the overnight leap in difficulty that marked second year. The gentle introductions of first year were gone. Every subject suddenly progressed into harder, more demanding territory. Professor McGonagall's transfiguration, turning beetles into buttons, was already advanced cross-object work, and lessons unfolded beneath a chorus of groans. Only a handful of top students, Hermione among them, kept pace. Roger had one advantage. The Order of Merlin had finally been awarded. For unprecedented work in transfiguration, he had become the youngest recipient in history. A few days into term, he noticed something odd. No matter how faultlessly he performed, professors no longer lavished house points on him the way they had in first year. He asked Professor Sprout, his head of house, about it. She smiled gently and said, "Dear, we aren't the Order of Merlin panel. That level of performance is simply normal for you, isn't it?" Roger grumbled privately about the side effects of winning. There was, however, one notable exception among the staff. Professor Gilderoy Lockhart. Lockhart favored him, handing out points with conspicuous enthusiasm. On Friday afternoon, when Lockhart swept into defense against the dark arts in outrageously bright jade robes, every hair immaculate, he spotted Roger and threw an arm around the boy's shoulders. "Hey, look who's here. Our youngest Order of Merlin winner, Roger," he boomed to the class. "As someone who bagged the trinket ages ago, I knew you'd pull it off. Those fogies at the ministry were simply biased." Thank you for speaking up, Professor," Roger said, eager to get off the dice. No, dear boy, you misunderstand," Lockhart replied, tightening the embrace and adopting a solemn air for the benefit of the packed room. "I'm not just backing you. Frankly," he puffed his chest, "I loathe that stale pure-blood supremacy rubbish. If I met Lord Voldemort now, I'd show him a thing or two." He punched the air for emphasis, ensuring everyone felt his righteous ardor. Roger was impressed. Few dared speak Voldemort's name aloud. Then Lockhart leaned close and whispered at breakneck speed, "Listen, mate, you're hot property right now. But take it from an old hand. Fame needs constant heat. You need explosive headlines now and then. How about a team-up? A powerhouse duo? I guarantee you front page every week. He winked with his rehearsed perfect smile. Trust me, I've won Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award 5 times running. My media reaches beyond imagination. And tomorrow, I'm off to the Malfoy Alchemy Workshop to ink a huge deal. Rumor is they're starting a new newspaper. When the classroom was nearly full, Lockhart let go. Roger slipped into the back row and, unseen, ran a quick, covert probe of legitimacy. What he found made his stomach turn. Inside Lockhart's head there was rot and sewage, nothing but theft and schemes. Lockhart was plotting to win Roger's trust, coax out the boy's latest research, charm his memory away, and then publish My Time at Hogwarts, mentoring the Order of Merlin winner in Transfiguration, with his own face on the cover. Roger had to fight hard to keep from striking him with a cruciatus in front of the class. The probe revealed more than fraudulent intent. Lockhart's mind was patchwork. Huge chunks of memory belonged to other people. He was a walking archive of stolen lives and stolen glories. For a moment, Roger remembered Dumbledore's private question. Wasn't Lockhart afraid of drowning in that torrent of foreign memories and ceasing to be himself? 76. Intrusion. In the dead of night, a thunderous blast ripped through the quiet of Hogwarts Castle. The ancient stones seemed to jolt awake. Lights flared on, footsteps and frightened cries echoed along the corridors. Deep inside the Chamber of Secrets, in the makeshift alchemy lab Roger shared with the Weasley twins, the floor quivered with the distant boom. The three of them set down their cauldrons and instruments at once and hurried from the hidden space. The corridor was already packed with startled students, the crowd surging like a frightened flock of pixies. Following the flow and the frantic gossip, they quickly realized the trouble was centered on Gryffindor Tower. By the time they arrived, the entrance to the tower was jammed tight. Headmaster Dumbledore stood at the front, graver than anyone had ever seen him. Professor McGonagall's lips were a thin line. Professor Snape's black robes hung like an ominous shadow. Professor Flitwick stood on tiptoe to peer ahead, and Lockhart looked utterly bewildered. "What happened?" Roger asked, trailing Fred and George through the crush. He couldn't see a thing over the heads in front. A strange hush rippled through the crowd, as though an icy drought were crawling along the corridor. The professors began shepherding students away. When the throng parted, Roger caught his breath in shock. The familiar oak door to the Gryffindor common room gaped with a jagged, blasted hole. The portrait of the fat lady that guarded the entrance was wrecked. The frame around where her head should have been lay in splinters, and the fat lady herself had vanished without a trace. This was no prank. It was a direct assault on Hogwarts, something no one present could remember ever happening. Dumbledore's sharp blue eyes swept the ruined doorway. He turned briskly, voice low but absolute. "Professor McGonagall, alert all the prefects. Tonight every student will sleep in the Great Hall. All staff will stand watch in turns. We must find the fat lady. Tell Filch to search every portrait in the castle at once." "I know where she is." A shrill voice dropped from the ceiling. Peeves's grinning head popped out beside a chandelier. He had meant to laugh, but catching Dumbledore's icy gaze, he toned it down, managing something almost respectful. "Headmaster, sir, I saw. She's scared silly and hiding in that landscape on the 5th floor, the one with the humping willow. Poor dame's a bit torn about the edges." "Did she say who did it?" Dumbledore asked quietly. The anger beneath his calm was unmistakable. "Oh, she did, Peeves answered, for once not clowning. "She wouldn't let him in, and he went berserk. Bang! Just look at the door. Sirius Black. Still the same foul temper, eh?" His voice quavered with gleeful dread. Down on the ground floor, in the Great Hall, the ceiling still reflected a brilliant starry sky, but no one felt like admiring it. October in the Scottish Highlands. An Arctic wind howled, and even inside the castle, the chill crept stubbornly through every crack and seam. Compared to the cozy dormitories behind thick stone walls, sleeping on the cold flagstones of the hall was misery. Roger pulled his blankets tighter. Certain icy drafts were wriggling in beside him. Around him, the younger students whispered, too excited and too frightened to sleep. The name Sirius Black fluttered everywhere. The professors on duty hissed, "Quiet," but the hushed buzz would not die. Professor Lockhart was clearly distracted. He stayed in the hall with obvious reluctance, pacing irritably and muttering about an important business meeting in the morning. By Merlin's beard, can't a man get some sleep? He declared, suddenly striding into the Gryffindor section. Do you realize how crucial tomorrow is? I've a major deal to close in Hogsmeade at dawn. Am I to meet them with black eyes and a haggard face? It'll ruin my public image. Professor McGonagall, discussing the night's attack in low tones with Snape, did not even look up. These are Headmaster Dumbledore's orders, Professor Lockhart. If you object, you may take it up with him directly. Lockhart glanced at Dumbledore and instantly shut up like a rooster with its neck wrung. He muttered sullenly, then trotted back to his office. When he reappeared, he was dressed in crisply pressed robes, hair slicked to perfection, a refined briefcase in hand, looking ready for a banquet at a moment's notice, clearly resolved to slip away at first light. The Great Hall's main doors were the chief gateway for the icy wind. Roger's spot near the staff platform, next to Slytherin, was fairly sheltered. The Gryffindor section pressed against the doors became the wind's favorite battleground. Harry, Ron, Seamus, and the other Gryffindors huddled tighter under their blankets as the cold gusted over them. Sleep impossible. Even Ron's rat, Scabbers, grew unusually restless. "Hey, Scabbers, keep still!" Ron snapped as a draught whipped through. He hugged the shivering rat closer. But the moment he rolled over, the drab little creature slipped through his fingers and vanished into the layers of bedding. "Scabbers?" Ron jerked upright, groping frantically through the blankets. "Scabbers, where are you?" He flung back the covers, shook the quilt. Nothing. He was frantic. To him, Scabbers was one of the few things in the world that belonged to him alone. "Ron, what now?" Professor McGonagall hurried over, brows knit. The night had already brought more than enough trouble. "Scabbers! My Scabbers is gone!" Ron's voice cracked as he kept searching in vain. McGonagall cast about, found nothing, and sighed. "All right, Ron. We'll look in the morning. For now, lie down and rest." Watching from the edge of the hall, Roger's mind turned sharp. That rat, Peter Pettigrew, had clearly been terrified by Sirius's raid tonight. If even Hogwarts couldn't keep Black out, was Pettigrew planning to run ahead of schedule? The realization hit all at once. Hogwarts' defenses were not the impenetrable fortress Dumbledore believed. If Sirius could break in, what of Lord Voldemort? Voldemort had slipped inside once before. Only he and Harry had been away at the time. Who could guarantee there wouldn't be another opportunity? Research on mobile alchemical constructs had to be accelerated. When the moment came, he would need a way out, fast. The initial excitement finally scattered. An uneasy hush settled over the Great Hall. Even Hogwarts no longer felt safe. Whispers died. Exhausted students curled on their pallets. The hall sank into a heavy, stifled silence, broken only by uneasy breaths. Not far away, Snape's low voice slid like a frigid serpent through the stone. Evidently, Black broke out for one purpose only, to find him. A despicable traitor, yet so single-minded. His words dripped scorn. But beneath the ice, Roger sensed something deeper, suppressed pain and fury roiling. Crawling out of Azkaban, not rushing to his dear master, but straight to Hogwarts, how touching his loyalty is. Professor McGonagall knew Snape's barbs were aimed at Black, and also at Harry's father, James Potter. "Severus," she said, voice heavy with exhaustion and a trace of guilt. I never thought he would end up on that path. Perhaps I was too lenient with them. Can you imagine how I regret it now?" "It has nothing to do with you, Minerva," Snape answered, tone softening for an instant before hardening again. He was baseborn. Betrayal is instinct to him. A short, harsh laugh grated from his throat. Still, James Potter deserved such a friend. Birds of a feather, both self-made trash. The final words, forced between clenched teeth, carried venomous hatred. "Severus, don't," McGonagall sniffed, throat tight. Peter Pettigrew was brave. He chose death over surrender. No one foresaw his murder. They awarded him the Order of Merlin posthumously, some small comfort for his poor mother. On the Gryffindor pallets, Harry Potter's eyes snapped open in the dark, heart hammering. Every word he'd heard detonated like thunder inside his skull. 77. The magic of the most subtle and terrifying details. The next day was Saturday. Nobody had slept well the night before, and by dawn most students were sneaking back to their dormitories for extra rest. After shepherding the younger pupils to their common room, Professor Lockhart strode out of the castle and headed straight for the wizarding village. It was afternoon before Hogwarts began to buzz with its usual life again. "Roger," said Harry, rarely seen in the library, walking up to him. "Do you know which shelf has the books about past recipients of the Order of Merlin?" Everyone in the library knew Roger carried the collection in his head. He was a walking card catalog. If you wanted a book, you asked him. "Section C, fifth shelf, top row. Have a look there," Roger answered offhandedly. It was obvious Harry had caught wind of some rumor. Roger, however, had no interest in the morbid details of how his father had died. That evening, Roger found himself back in the headmaster's office. "You want to know why a will can be lost in a torrent of memories?" Dumbledore looked up from the letter he was writing, faintly surprised. Young people, always fatally curious about dangerous fields. He finished the letter, sent it off with an owl, and then made time to tutor Roger. "Evidently, you didn't take my last warning to heart," Dumbledore said mildly, and with a hint of relief, too. At least Roger had come to ask, rather than conducting risky experiments on his own. "This touches on a deep question. What exactly is will?" His eyes twinkled as he picked up a lemon drop. "Call it consciousness, cognition, a thought, whatever term you prefer, wizards still don't fully understand it." He slid the candy dish toward Roger. "Interestingly, will can actually be manufactured." "Will can be manufactured?" Roger exclaimed, and then, as he thought, understood. "The Sorting Hat itself is a living will." "I see you understand," Dumbledore nodded approvingly, took a Bertie Bott's bean, chewed once, made a face, and turned to spit it out. "The Sorting Hat does possess its own will. Even Hogwarts Castle has one. But sustaining will consumes magic. Since the castle's completion, it mostly slumbers. Powerful magic is the cradle of will. Objects steeped in it naturally tend to develop will." Roger took a sweet too. Pondering such things was taxing, and sugar helped. "But manufactured will still falls far short of the will found in intelligent beings," he mused. "Is it because the magic isn't strong enough?" Roger guessed. "Not at all," Dumbledore said, evidently finding the bean too cloying. With a flick of his wand, he produced 2 foaming mugs of butterbeer. "It has no simple link to the amount of magic. The topic is vast. We'll save more for another day. Back to the matter of memory." He took a sip. "To resist an alien flood of memories without losing yourself, you must keep a clumency running at every moment. The key is not merely blocking probes, but strictly isolating your own memories from the foreign ones. That is, essentially desperately guarding the ego, your sense of self. Yet the drawback is severe. It badly interferes with the will's perception and control of magic. Persist long enough, and the will itself may warp unpredictably." Roger finally understood. Maintaining that isolation wrapped the ego in a hard shell. Though it protected cognition, it dulled the will's sensitivity to the magical world, like wearing thick padded clothes that numb you to temperature and breeze. It explained Lockhart perfectly. A Ravenclaw star student who excelled at memory charms, but was a mess at everything else. Flooded by alien memories, his ability to control magic had eroded, precisely the knows a bit of everything, but can't perform any of it predicament. That, in turn, raised the ultimate question about the nature of magic. Voluntarists claimed magic sprang from will, mind over matter, while soul theorists said it arose from the soul. Whether it was recluses like the Old Wizard, the Academy represented by Dumbledore, or Lord Voldemort's power-first faction, the mainstream leaned toward voluntarism, magic as will made manifest. This view fit the phenomenon that great magic could breed will, as if will and magic were 2 sides of the same coin, mutually convertible. A deeper question followed. Where does the world's magic originate? If magic is will, then tracing its essence further became chilling. Dumbledore, busy as ever, cut the private lesson short. The week began anew. Professor Lockhart looked radiant and unusually excited. Evidently, he'd had a profitable weekend. Roger entered the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, sat down, and watched the beaming Lockhart, mentally calculating how many galleons the man must have raked in that weekend from signed photos, autobiographies, and promotional appearances. Roger himself had received 10,000 galleons after being honored. Sounded like a lot, but research burned money. Just prototyping the double vision spectacles had swallowed over 1,000 galleons in materials, and they were still far from marketable. The costs were too high. To find cheaper materials, his owl Victor had become a shuttle courier between Hogwarts and Diagon Alley's alchemical shops, flying back with samples every other day for the Weasley twins to test. The shopkeeper, sensing profit in the frequent transactions, had expressed keen interest in acting as sales agent for the double vision spectacles. If Roger could push the cost down to about 10 galleons a pair, he thought, he could test the waters and earn some research funds. While he mulled business, Lockhart cleared his throat and began the lesson. "All right, class." 3 cages stood before him, each holding the same Cornish pixies that had made him a laughingstock last time. Clearly, Lockhart intended to redeem himself. "Defense against the dark arts," he intoned solemnly, though many students curled their lips, "requires understanding the dark arts themselves. So today I'll show you a real dark art and then teach you how to counter it." Roger frowned, wondering what trick Lockhart might be up to. The next second, his jaw nearly dropped. Lockhart drew his wand and, with a silent spell, aimed at one terrified pixie. The creature was seized by an invisible force. Its spindly legs snapped against its body as it convulsed wildly, unable even to scream. The classroom filled with wordless, intense agony. Lockhart surveyed the hushed students, a faint smugness in his voice. "Can anyone tell me what spell this is?" It's Cruciatus," Neville whispered, the tremor barely audible, yet every syllable rang crystal clear. 78. Lockhart's defense against the dark arts. Professor Lockhart turned, his sharp gaze landing on Neville before flicking to the register. "Mr. Longbottom? Excellent, 5 points to Gryffindor." His voice brooked no argument. He raised it for the class to hear. "Yes, the spell I just used was Crucio." The words hit the room like ice thrown into boiling water. A frantic buzz erupted. Students gasped, stared, and whispered, the shock rippling outward like a tide. I always said Professor Lockhart was amazing." Hermione in the front row swallowed audibly. Her voice was barely a squeak. The sudden display of power made her proud and a little afraid. Lockhart ignored the uproar and swept his wand toward the second cage of Cornish pixies. The pixie inside froze, then melted into docility. It flicked its own latch open, trotted forward on tiny feet, and posed in the center of the room. With an elegant flick, Lockhart made the creature waddle through a clumsy jig, utterly unlike the marauding menace it had been. Students who had suffered its pranks roared with laughter at the absurd reversal. Lockhart did not smile. "See? One spell and your opponent is yours. In case the magic is unfamiliar, I'll demonstrate again." Familiar? Roger thought. He knew Imperio inside out. The professor, however, was intent on his lesson and never glanced his way. As soon as the spell lifting the pixie's obedience faded, its eyes flared and it shot for the window like an arrow. Lockhart was faster. A lightning jab of his wand yanked the creature back as if by an invisible rein, forcing it to resume its ridiculous dance. "It is completely under my control," Lockhart said quietly, sheathing his wand. "I could make it end its own life this instant." The last scattered chuckles died. The room dropped into a stunned, almost lethal silence. Beside Roger, Wayne shivered uncontrollably. Lockhart's dazzling smile returned, though now no one found it charming. "So," he said, "who can name the spell?" Hermione's hand shot up as if spring-loaded. "Ah, Miss Granger, please." "Imperio," she answered, clear and loud. "Excellent. Another 5 points to Gryffindor." Lockhart tapped his wand. The pixie padded meekly back into its cage. "Resisting it takes special technique. We'll cover that shortly. First, the final demonstration." A collective gulp passed through the room. Everyone already knew what would come next. The air itself felt heavy. Roger knew the Unforgivable Curses by heart, yet the man standing at the front was a stranger. The books were clear. Lockhart might know theory, but his practical magic was supposed to be laughable. Apart from memory charms, at which he had been terrifyingly adept, able to steal whole swathes of recollection, his reputation in spellwork was a joke. That was why, within weeks of his first term at Hogwarts, he had been exposed and reduced to a laughingstock. But the flawless dark spells he had just shown, all cast without a sound, shattered every certainty. Perhaps he wasn't inept, perhaps his expertise ran down far darker paths, or maybe he had been hiding it all along. Drinking in the mix of awe and dread on their faces, Lockhart looked satisfied. His wand whipped toward the third cage, swift and silent. A blinding flash of green light cracked like thunder. When the glare faded, the pixie lay motionless, unmarked, lifeless. "That," Lockhart declared, "is Avada Kedavra. It kills outright. No counter curse exists. Though," he added, his voice heavy with meaning, "I'm told one person has survived it." Every stunned gaze slid to Harry Potter. Harry, pale, stared at the tiny corpse, memories of his parents' murder rising like a storm cloud. Lockhart pressed on. "Those are the unforgivable curses. Use them illegally, and the ministry will punish you harshly. Cast them on a human, and Azkaban waits for life." He straightened. His jade-green robes looked suddenly august. "But now I'll teach you how to fight them." For the rest of the lesson, the students hung on every word. Even Ron, who had branded Lockhart a fraud, scribbled notes with fierce concentration. The classroom stayed hushed, quills scratching, until the bell sliced through the quiet. Students poured out like steam. Only then did the whispers swell into a torrent. "Weird, too weird," Roger muttered, following Hermione into the corridor, unease thickening in his chest. Neither the canon he remembered nor the magic he knew suggested Lockhart should wield such power. Had the man somehow broken whatever shackles contained his deeper self and unleashed a true skill? Hermione glowed with vindication that her hero's books had proved true. Harry walked in brooding silence. Lockhart cut through the crowd and stopped them neatly. He bestowed his brilliant smile on Harry. "Mr. Potter, perhaps you'd visit my office after lessons?" He never once looked at Roger. However, 2 days earlier, he had been begging Roger for a joint photo for the front page of the Daily Prophet. Now his manner had flipped. If the biocomputer hadn't shown Lockhart as perfectly ordinary, Roger would have sworn a possession, like Quirrell's, was underway. For the rest of October, there were no more attacks, and the panic that had gripped the castle gradually eased. Word of the incidents leaked out, but public outrage fell on the ministry rather than on Hogwarts. Ever since that disastrous trial, Cornelius Fudge had lost credibility and authority. His position as minister was tenuous at best. Sirius Black's escape only deepened the public's fury. If Fudge had been busy squabbling with rivals, how could Black have broken free? If the minister had been competent, Black would have been recaptured long ago. After all, Fudge had even deployed the Dementors. The Daily Prophet ran speculations about when he should resign. Another headline that caught Roger's eye was about Malfoy Manor being destroyed. The paper claimed Lucius Malfoy had funded an alchemy workshop and that an experimental accident had leveled the ancestral home. The photograph printed was taken from too far away to be conclusive, only a blur of devastation, but Draco's hollow-eyed, devastated expression seemed to confirm it. Harry, meanwhile, was not doing well. His scar throbbed off and on through the month, though he said nothing about it. At the end of October, during a Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson, a sudden stab of pain made him falter in practice, and he was cleanly hit by a stupefy. That incident could not be kept quiet, so it put Professor Dumbledore immediately on guard. Seeing the rare gravity on the headmaster's face, Roger understood what it meant. Trouble with Lord Voldemort. Either the Dark Lord himself was restless, or his strength was returning. Neither possibility was comforting. Maybe because the threat of Sirius still hung over them, this year's Halloween feast was simpler than usual, but at least nothing happened. Harry stayed inside the castle as instructed. For once, Fudge's desperation to hold office and Dumbledore's fear of Voldemort produced the same aim: keep Hogwarts quiet. Then, as everyone began to hope things were settling, the inevitable occurred. Late the night after Halloween, Roger and the Weasley twins were leaving the Chamber of Secrets as usual, heading for their common rooms. Rounding a corridor, all three stopped short. There, sprawled on the flagstones, lay Argus Filch's cat, Madame Norris. Worse, she lay utterly still. "Listen," Fred gulped. "We've got to get out of here." "Yeah," George's voice trembled. His face had gone paper white. Roger stayed calm. He crouched and examined the cat, noting clear traces of magic. It looked as if someone had tried to sneak into the castle and been spotted by Madame Norris. The attacker had struck with vicious speed, felling her instantly with a powerful charm, something like stupefy, leaving no time to cry out. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. "You there!" Why aren't you in your dormitories at this hour? Filch appeared at the far end, and his gaze snapped to the motionless cat. No, he staggered back, clutching at his hollow cheeks, and let out a high, keening wail. My cat, my Madame Norris, what have you done to her? His scream split the night and roused the castle. It was you! Filch's bloodshot eyes fixed on the three boys. Murderers! Argus! Dumbledore's calm voice cut through as he arrived with several professors. The headmaster looked the cat over and said without alarm, She is not dead. This is no ordinary spell. Roger, Fred, and George could hardly have cast it. Our first priority is to get her to Madame Pomfrey. Exactly. As long as the soul is intact, she can be mended. I have experience when I dealt with vampires in Serbia. Lockhart volunteered from nearby. His office was the closest. At the words, not dead, still salvable, a glimmer of hope returned to Filch's cloudy eyes. In the hospital wing, Madame Pomfrey managed to revive Madame Norris, though the cat was badly injured and listless. Filch clutched her to his chest like a talisman. Dumbledore's expression had gone grave. The headmaster seemed to have decided something. Very well, he said with quiet authority. This is not to be spoken of. I will handle it. A few days later, another attack took place. This time the victim was Colin Creevey, Harry's devoted first-year fan. He was ambushed in the Gryffindor common room and found by an early riser the next morning, rushed to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey sighed in relief after examining him. Thankfully only stunned. Another stupefy, I expect. The treatment is simple. He should wake soon. Evidently the assailant was less vicious this time. Both Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall, standing close by, visibly relaxed. Thank heavens, the boy is all right, McGonagall murmured. When Colin woke, he could remember nothing useful. A blurred figure, no face, a silent charm that felled him instantly. This attack made it impossible to keep the incidents under wraps. The next morning, when Roger went into the Great Hall for breakfast, the change in atmosphere hit him. Unfamiliar, stern-faced figures stood about, eyes sharp and scanning. At the staff table, one face made Roger's stomach tighten. Rufus Scrimger, head of the Auror office, his mane-like gray hair unmistakable. He sat beside Dumbledore, expression unreadable, the whole room taut with tension. It seemed some arrangement had been reached between Fudge and Dumbledore over the serious black matter, but Roger soon realized their agreement went further than he had imagined. Outside, beyond the castle, rose a vast dark curtain. He could not mistake it. The Dementors. Aurors were stationed inside the castle, with a ring of Dementors surrounding it. They intended to trap Sirius Black once and for all. 80. Daily Prophet Diagon Alley was the commercial and informational heart of the British wizarding world. Almost every important magical firm had a storefront or branch there. Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Ollivander's Wand Shop, Slug and Jigger's Apothecary, Obscurus Books, the publisher of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and even Terror Tours, which ran Vampire Castle tours, stood shoulder to shoulder. And among all of them, the most famous was the premier news outlet of the magical world, the Daily Prophet. Inside the Daily Prophet headquarters, in the editor-in-chief's office, Barnabas Cuff sat behind a large desk, fingers tapping the wood with impatience. His sharp gaze was fixed on Rita Skeeter, and his tone was edged with dissatisfaction. Rita, he said, it's been a month. Don't tell me there's still no progress on that exclusive with Roger Lewis. The relationship between the Daily Prophet and the Ministry of Magic was complicated and intimate. The paper functioned as a semi-official mouthpiece, subject to funding and censorship, but it also had a keen sense of survival. Cuff's skill was knowing how to appear subtly independent, not slavishly obedient, but not openly antagonistic either. By deftly shifting between factions, the Prophet maintained the aura of objectivity and fairness. Earlier, under the ministry's direction, the paper had carefully packaged the story of the robbery at Nicholas LeMay's manor, portraying Minister Cornelius Fudge as the hero who had turned the tide. But when the farcical trial unfolded, the Prophet swung its guns the other way and unleashed a torrent of criticism of Fudge's incompetence. With news of Black's reappearance at Hogwarts, they even speculated with grave headlines about the possibility of the minister stepping down. That pivot allowed most readers to forget the recent praise. If anyone remembered, they assumed the earlier coverage was based on reliable sources at the time rather than propaganda. By walking this tightrope, the Prophet had reestablished itself as both authoritative and independent. Its influence stretched into every corner of the wizarding community. The anti-Fudge storm had stung the minister. Suppressing his anger, Fudge had repeatedly contacted Cuff, offering goodwill and promising increased subsidies to cool public outrage. He had also been forced to apologize to Dumbledore and send a large number of Aurors to Hogwarts to await orders, hoping to prevent further attacks. Cuff was an old hand at shaping public sentiment. He knew the task of demonstrating independence had been achieved. Now it was time to placate the ministry. But after savaging Fudge only 2 days earlier, how could the paper reverse course without damaging its hard-earned reputation? Cuff had already planned the key move. Roger Lewis, the central figure in that ridiculous trial, the youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin in history, a victim with his own halo, would be the pivot. If Lewis were willing to sit for Rita's quick quotes quill and offer a few conciliatory lines, phrases like, "I understand the ministry's difficulties," or "I believe in Minister Fudge's original intentions," public opinion would cool instantly. What if he wouldn't cooperate? That didn't matter. If he allowed himself to be quoted, the paper could turn his words into prose that soothed the public and gave Fudge a face-saving path while preserving the Prophet's neutral image. It was perfect. The problem was the first step. A month had passed, and there was still no interview. Editor. A flash of helplessness crossed Rita's face behind her signature gold-rimmed glasses. Mr. Lewis has named a price, 50,000 galleons, just to sit down and chat. 50,000? Cuff nearly bounced from his chair. The Prophet was wealthy, not just from ministry subsidies and sales, but from ties with leading firms and pure-blood families. Broomstick makers like Cleansweep, Comet, or the Fleet Giants poured money into advertisements and advertorials to build brand loyalty and suppress foreign competition. The paper's coffers were full, but 50,000 galleons for one student interview was outrageous. "This kid's asking for a fortune," Cuffy growled. Roger Lewis was famous, but was he worth that? Did he think he was Gilderoy Lockhart who could bankroll himself with book deals? A student who'd taught him to open his mouth so wide? Dumbledore? The ministry had shown goodwill. Dumbledore had no reason to sabotage this, surely. "I've checked," Rita said, sitting up straighter. "Certain. Mr. Lewis is obsessed with alchemy research. You know how it is. Alchemy is a bottomless money pit. He's strapped for galleons. I think he's actually desperate." "What does Dumbledore say?" Cuff pressed. "Hogwarts is in turmoil because of Black. Headmaster Dumbledore is overwhelmed and can't be bothered with this." Rita curled her lip. She'd attempted to contact Dumbledore personally and had been given the cold shoulder. "So we've run into a genius who's had his pockets drained by alchemy?" Cuff's eyes widened. Then, after a pause, he regarded the situation from a new angle. "That might not be a bad thing," he muttered. A sharp glint flashed in Rita's eyes. Her quick quotes quill, sensing the rhythm of a story, spun nimbly between her fingers. "Since he's demanding such a large sum, he'll be exceptionally cooperative," she said. "Whatever we want him to say, how could he not say it? Minister Fudge will be very happy with that sort of cooperation." What if he takes the money and then refuses to cooperate? Cuffy still had doubts. He'll have taken 50,000 galleons. Rita's smile turned cold and meaningful. "How a piece is written is our business. If he takes the money and keeps quiet, what can he do afterward? If he tries to deny it, we can accidentally leak that he accepted the money and nudge public opinion. The public will see him as a greedy villain who took money and then tried to blackmail us. Who would believe him then?" "Brilliant, Rita." Cuff's expression smoothed into a knowing smile. "We won't pay it ourselves. I'll convey this reasonable request to Minister Fudge. He'll be glad to spend the money to calm the public." He paused, the smile deepening with a hint of ruthlessness. "When the time comes, whether Roger Lewis admits it or not, everyone will know. The Ministry of Magic spent a fortune to buy his endorsement. Both Fudge's and Lewis's reputations will be stained. And the Daily Prophet? We get the exclusive and once again prove our independence and investigative acumen. A guaranteed profit, wouldn't you say?"